It's a realm shrouded in mystery and, unfortunately, sometimes in darkness of a far more sinister kind. Tonight we delve into that darkness. What you are about to see are not fictional tales spun for entertainment. These are accounts, sometimes fragmented, sometimes chillingly detailed, of true crimes that have been linked to the dark web. These stories can be disturbing, even unsettling. They offer a glimpse into the potential dangers that lurk within this shadowy part of the internet. So take a deep breath and prepare yourself. What you are about to witness are true dark web crime scary stories. Viewer discretion is advised. My name is Sarah Miller, and until a few weeks ago, I considered myself a fairly ordinary person. I worked as a freelance graphic designer for my small apartment in Chicago, enjoyed weekend hikes in the nearby forest preserves, and spent most evenings catching up on my favorite streaming shows. Nothing particularly exciting, nothing out of the ordinary. But lately, the ordinary has been replaced by a gnawing unease, a constant prickle of fear that follows me like a shadow. It all started with a music box. Not just any music box, mind you. This was my grandmother's music box, a beautiful antique piece she cherished. It was made of dark, polished wood, intricately carved with swirling floral patterns and tiny, almost imperceptible figures. Inside, a delicate mechanism played a hauntingly beautiful melody, a tune that always reminded me of rainy afternoons spent curled up on her lap, listening to her stories. The music box had been lost years ago, vanished without a trace during a move. My grandmother was heartbroken, and even though it happened when I was just a child, I remember her sadness vividly. It was one of those objects that held more than just monetary value. It held memories, a tangible link to the past. After my grandmother passed away last year, the memory of that lost music box resurfaced with a renewed intensity. It felt like a piece of her was still missing, and I became determined to find it. I scoured antique shops, flea markets, and online auction sites, but to no avail. The music box seemed to have disappeared from the face of the earth. I even posted inquiries on several antique collector forums, describing the music box in detail, hoping someone might have seen it or know of its whereabouts. It was on one of these forums that I first encountered the suggestion of the dark web. A user with the cryptic handle, Nightingale Collector, responded to my post, stating that if I was truly looking for something rare and elusive, the dark web might be my only option. They described it as a hidden corner of the internet, a place where anything and everything could be found, often outside the bounds of legality and conventional marketplaces. My initial reaction was one of skepticism and a healthy dose of fear. The dark web had always been portrayed in the media as a dangerous place, a haven for criminals and illicit activities. The thought of venturing into such territory made me uneasy, to say the least. However, the more I thought about it, the more desperate I became. The idea that my grandmother's music box might still exist somewhere, waiting to be found, was a powerful lure. A Nightingale Collector had also mentioned that there were legitimate marketplaces on the dark web catering to collectors of rare and unusual items, places where transactions were conducted with a degree of anonymity and security. This gave me a sliver of hope, a reason to believe that my search might not be entirely reckless. After weeks of hesitant research, navigating the murky waters of Tor browsers and encrypted connections, I finally stumbled upon a marketplace that seemed plausible. It was called the Curio Bazaar, and it featured a wide array of antique and collectible items, from rare books and vintage jewelry to historical artifacts and, yes, even music boxes. The site had a surprisingly professional design, with detailed descriptions and high-quality photographs of the items for sale. There was even a feedback system for sellers, with ratings and reviews from previous buyers, which added a veneer of legitimacy. I spent hours browsing the listings, my heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. And then I saw it. A music box that matched my grandmother's description perfectly. The dark, polished wood, the intricate carvings, even the faint scratch on the lid that I remembered so well, it was all there. The seller, going by the name Melody Man, had provided several clear photographs from different angles, showcasing the exquisite craftsmanship. The description was brief but detailed, mentioning the age of the music box, the type of wood, and the melody it played. It even stated that the music box had belonged to a private collector for many years, and was now being offered for sale due to unforeseen circumstances. My hands trembled as I read the listing. Could this be it? Could I have actually found my grandmother's lost treasure on this shadowy corner of the internet? The price was steep, far more than I had initially anticipated spending, but the emotional value of the music box was immeasurable. After a few days of agonizing deliberation, weighing the risks against the potential reward, I decided to take the plunge. The transaction itself was surprisingly straightforward, albeit shrouded in the anonymity of cryptocurrency. I created a digital wallet, purchased the required amount of Bitcoin, and sent it to the address provided by Melodyman. The marketplace acted as an escrow service, holding the funds until I confirmed receipt of the item. It all felt strangely impersonal and detached. A transaction conducted in the digital void, yet the anticipation building within me was intensely real. Days turned into a week, then two. I checked the tracking information religiously, even though it provided only vague updates. Finally, a small, unmarked package arrived at my doorstep. My heart leaped with excitement as I tore it open, expecting to see the familiar shape of the antique music box nestled inside. But what I found instead was a small, plain cardboard box. It was surprisingly light, and a wave of disappointment washed over me as I lifted the lid. There was no music box. Instead, nestled on a bed of crumpled brown paper, was a single item, a key. It was a small key, a tarnish with age and a strange, almost greenish patina. The head of the key was intricately shaped, with a series of tiny, almost microscopic symbols etched into its surface. It didn't look like any key I had ever seen before, certainly not the kind of key that would wind a music box. My grandmother had owned many antique pieces over the years, but I had never seen a key like this among her belongings. A knot of unease began to form in my stomach. This wasn't right. This wasn't what I had ordered. Had I been scammed? Was this some kind of cruel joke? I immediately tried to contact Melodyman through the marketplace, but their profile had vanished. The curio bazaar, which had seemed so legitimate just days before, now appeared different, somehow darker, the listings taking on a more sinister hue in my mind's eye. I held the key in my hand, turning it over and over, examining the strange symbols. They looked ancient, almost otherworldly. A shiver ran down my spine. This was more than just a missing music box. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong. The ordinary life I had once known was starting to unravel, replaced by a growing sense of dread and the unsettling mystery of the tarnished key. This was just the beginning. The weight of the tarnished key in my palm felt strangely significant, far heavier than its small size would suggest. I stared at it for what felt like hours, the intricate symbols etched into its head seeming to writhe and shift under the dim light of my apartment. They weren't part of any alphabet I recognized, nor did they resemble any known historical markings. They looked almost organic, like tiny, interconnected vines or perhaps the skeletal remains of some minuscule creatures. My first instinct was to try and find out what the key unlocked. I went through every drawer, every box, every container in my apartment, trying to see if it fit any lock I owned. I even checked the locks on my doors and windows, though the key was clearly too small and of a different design for those. The futility of my search only amplified my growing frustration and anxiety. It was a key to something unknown, something that wasn't meant to be easily found. Driven by a desperate need for answers, I turned back to the internet. I started by trying to identify the symbols. I took high-resolution photos of the key and uploaded them to various image recognition websites and online forums dedicated to symbology and ancient languages. Days passed with no results. The symbols remained stubbornly unidentifiable, a cryptic message from an unknown sender. My thoughts kept returning to the dark web marketplace, the Curio Bazaar. I tried accessing the site again, but it was gone. The URL I had bookmarked now led to a blank page, a digital void where the bustling marketplace had once been. Melodyman's profile was also untraceable. It was as if they had never existed, or as if they had deliberately erased their digital footprint after our transaction. This realization sent a fresh wave of chills down my spine. It was becoming increasingly clear that I had stumbled into something far more sinister than a simple case of online fraud. Paranoia began to creep into my thoughts, like an insidious vine. Was I being watched? Was this key some kind of marker, a way for someone or something to find me? I started checking my windows and doors multiple times a day, peering through the blinds at every passing car or pedestrian. Sleep became a luxury, my nights filled with restless tossing and turning, haunted by fragmented dreams of shadowy figures and the glint of tarnished metal. One evening, while meticulously examining the key under a magnifying glass, I noticed something I had missed before. On the shaft of the key, almost invisible to the naked eye, was a series of tiny numbers etched into the metal. They were so small and faint that I initially dismissed them as scratches, but upon closer inspection I realized they formed a sequence, or 1783. My mind raced. Could this be date? April 17, 1983. That was my grandmother's birthday. The realization hit me like a physical blow, leaving me breathless and trembling. What could this possibly mean? Was there a connection between this strange key and my grandmother's past? Had she somehow been involved in something that led to this? The thought was both terrifying and strangely compelling. I started digging through old family photos and documents, searching for any clue that might link my grandmother to this mysterious key. I spent hours poring over old letters, diaries, and even her address book, hoping to find a name, a place, anything that might shed some light on the enigma. But everything I found painted a picture of a normal, loving woman, a far cry from someone who might be involved in the shadowy world of the dark web or possess such a cryptic object. Then, I remembered something my mother had mentioned years ago. My grandmother had a storage unit somewhere on the outskirts of the city. She had kept it even after moving into a smaller apartment, saying it held some old furniture and family heirlooms that she couldn't bear to part with. After her death, my mother had briefly considered going through it, but ultimately decided against it, overwhelmed by grief and the sheer volume of my grandmother's belongings. The key, she thought, was probably lost years ago. A sudden, chilling thought struck me. What if the key wasn't lost? What if this tarnished key was the key to that storage unit? The date etched on it, my grandmother's birthday, seemed too significant to be a mere coincidence. It felt like a breadcrumb, a clue deliberately left for me to find. The idea of venturing into that storage unit filled me with a sense of dread, but the need to know, to understand the connection to my grandmother, was too strong to ignore. The next morning, I managed to track down the location of the storage facility. It was in a run-down industrial area, a place that felt forgotten and desolate. The storage unit was number 417, the same numbers as the date on the key, albeit reversed. My hands shook as I inserted the key into the lock. It slid in smoothly, clicking into place with a soft, almost imperceptible sound. A wave of nausea washed over me as I turned the key and pulled the door open. The air inside the unit was thick with the smell of dust and decay. It was dimly lit by a single bare bulb hanging precariously from the ceiling. The unit was crammed with old furniture draped in white sheets, stacks of cardboard boxes, and forgotten relics of the past. It looked exactly as my mother had described it. But as my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I noticed something that didn't quite fit. Tucked away in a corner, partially hidden behind a dusty armchair, was a small, wooden box. It was the same dark, polished wood as my grandmother's lost music box. My heart pounded in my chest. Could it be? Could this be the music box I had been searching for? I rushed over to the box, my hands trembling as I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was the antique music box. It was exactly as I remembered it, the intricate carvings, the faint scratch on the lid, everything was perfect. A wave of relief washed over me, quickly followed by a surge of confusion. Why would my grandmother have kept it hidden away in a storage unit? And what was the significance of the key? As I reached out to touch the music box, my fingers brushed against something else inside the box. It was a small, leather-bound journal. Its pages were yellowed and brittle with age, and the leather cover was worn and cracked. My name, Sarah, was faintly embossed on the front in elegant script. A cold dread gripped me. This wasn't just my grandmother's music box. This was something more. Something personal. Something that was meant for me. With trembling hands, I opened the journal. The first page was dated April 17th, 1983, my grandmother's birthday, the same date etched on the key. And the first entry began with a sentence that sent a chill down my spine, a sentence that hinted at a dark secret. A hidden life I never knew existed. It has begun. The bargain has been struck, and the key is the first step. My heart hammered against my ribs as I devoured the words in my grandmother's journal. Her familiar handwriting, usually so neat and elegant, was shaky and rushed in these early entries, as if she were writing in a state of fear and urgency. The bargain she mentioned was with an entity she referred to only as the collector, a being who dealt in rare and unique objects, offering unimaginable power or fulfillment in exchange for equally precious items or services. The entry detailed how my grandmother, desperate to save her ailing mother, my great-grandmother, had stumbled upon whispers of the collector in obscure occult circles. Driven by love and desperation, she had sought out this entity, offering her most prized possession, her own innate musical talent, a gift she had cherished since childhood, in exchange for her mother's health. The collector had agreed, and my great-grandmother had miraculously recovered. Subsequent entries revealed the true cost of the bargain. The collector hadn't just taken her talent. He had claimed ownership of any object imbued with her musical essence, any melody she created or played with deep emotional resonance. The music box, it turned out, was the first such object. It was a gift from my grandfather, and the melody it played was one she had composed for him in their youth, filled with all the joy and love of their early relationship. Over the years, the collector had periodically requested these resonant objects, each request accompanied by a subtle, unsettling sign, a black feather appearing on her doorstep, a recurring dream of a shadowy figure beckoning from the darkness. My grandmother wrote of living in constant fear, never knowing when the collector would come calling again. The key, the journal explained, was a failsafe, a way to hide the most precious of these objects, the ones she couldn't bear to part with. It was the key to this storage unit, a place she hoped would remain undiscovered by the collector. The date etched on the key, her birthday, was a personal reminder, a symbol of the day her life had irrevocably changed. As I continued reading, the entries became increasingly disturbing. My grandmother wrote of feeling a growing darkness within her, a sense of being watched, of unseen forces at play in her life. She described nightmares filled with grotesque figures and endless collections of stolen treasures. The joy had leached out of her life, replaced by a gnawing paranoia and a profound sense of loss. Then, I reached an entry that made my blood run cold. It was dated just a few weeks before the music box was supposedly lost during the move. In it, my grandmother wrote of a new request from the collector, a demand for the music box itself. She had tried to refuse, but the signs had become more insistent, more menacing. She wrote of feeling the collector's presence growing stronger, his influence seeping into her waking hours. The final entry was short and frantic, written in a barely legible scrawl. He knows about the key. He knows about the storage unit. I have to hide it. I have to protect it, Sarah. If you ever find this. The entry abruptly ended there. A horrifying realization dawned on me. The music box hadn't been lost. My grandmother had deliberately hidden it, knowing the collector was coming for it. And somehow someone on the dark web, someone calling themselves Melody Man, knew about it too. Who was Melody Man? Was he an agent of the collector? Had he somehow tracked down the music box and used the dark web as a means to lure me into this terrifying game? The thought sent a shiver of icy fear down my spine. I looked around the dusty storage unit, the forgotten relics now seeming to take on a sinister aura. The air felt heavy, charged with an unseen presence. I clutched the music box to my chest, feeling the smooth, cold wood against my skin. The melody it played was no longer a comforting reminder of my childhood. It now sounded haunting, melancholic, imbued with a tragic history I had never known. I had to get out of here. I had to take the music box and the journal and run. But as I turned to leave, I heard a soft click from the door. It had closed. I tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic surged through me. I was trapped. Then, I heard a sound from the shadows at the back of the storage unit. A soft, shuffling sound, like something heavy being dragged across the concrete floor. My breath hitched in my throat. I strained my eyes, trying to pierce the gloom. Slowly, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was tall and gaunt, its features obscured by the shadows. But I could see its eyes, two pinpricks of malevolent light that seemed to pierce right through me. In its hand it held a long, thin object that glinted faintly in the dim light. A voice, raspy and cold as death, echoed through the storage unit. "You have something that belongs to me." My blood ran cold. This was him. This was the collector. I backed away, clutching the music box tighter. "No," I whispered, my voice trembling. "It belongs to my grandmother." The figure chuckled, a dry, rattling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Your grandmother made a deal. And now, it's time for the payment to be collected." He took a step closer, and I could see the object in his hand more clearly. It was a key, identical to the one I held, but instead of being tarnished, it gleamed with an unnatural obsidian-like sheen. "The key opens more than just doors, child," the collector hissed, his eyes fixed on the music box. "It opens pathways. Pathways to things you cannot imagine." He lunged forward, and I screamed, dropping the journal in my terror. I scrambled back, trying to put distance between us, but the storage unit was small, and he moved with a speed that belied his gaunt appearance. Just as he reached for the music box, I did the only thing I could think of. I opened the lid. The haunting melody filled the storage unit, the notes echoing in the confined space. The collector recoiled as if struck, his eyes widening in surprise and pain. The obsidian key in his hand flickered and dimmed. "The resonance," he hissed, clutching his head. "It's too strong." Taking advantage of his momentary disorientation, I kicked out, hitting him in the leg. He stumbled back, giving me a precious few seconds. I grabbed the journal and scrambled towards the door, throwing my weight against it. It creaked open just enough for me to squeeze through. I didn't stop running until I was out of the industrial park and onto a main road, my lungs burning, my heart pounding. I hailed a taxi and didn't feel safe until I was back in my apartment. The doors locked, the curtains drawn. I still have the music box in the journal. I haven't dared to open the music box again. The melody, once a source of comfort, now fills me with dread. I don't know what the collector is or what he wants, but I know he won't stop until he gets what he came for. The dark web opened a door to a world I never knew existed, a world of hidden bargains and terrifying entities. I went looking for a lost piece of my past, but I found something far more sinister. And now, I fear that the payment for my curiosity is yet to come. Sometimes the things that are lost are better left unfound, and some doors, once open, can never truly be closed. My name is Mark, and I've always been drawn to the intricate workings of technology. From disassembling old computers as a kid to diving deep into the complexities of network security in my adult years, the digital world has always held a captivating allure for me. I wouldn't necessarily call myself a hacker in the stereotypical sense. I wasn't driven by malicious intent or the desire to break into secure systems for personal gain. My fascination stemmed more from a deep-seated curiosity, a relentless urge to understand how things worked, to explore the hidden pathways and unseen connections that formed the backbone of our increasingly digital lives. This curiosity, however, had a darker side. It sometimes led me down rabbit holes I probably shouldn't have ventured into corners of the internet that were best left unexplored. The allure of the unknown, the forbidden, often proved too strong to resist. It was this very curiosity that led me, on a particularly uneventful Tuesday night, to stumble upon something truly unsettling. I was researching obscure network protocols. Something that might sound incredibly dull to most people, but for me, it was like piecing together an intricate puzzle. One link led to another, and before I knew it, I found myself on a forum discussing the Tor network and its hidden services. I had heard whispers of the dark web before. Of course, the shadowy underbelly of the internet, where illicit activity supposedly thrived. Like most people, I had dismissed it as something sensationalized by the media, a myth more than reality. But as I read through the forum posts filled with cryptic language and veiled references, a seed of morbid curiosity began to sprout within me. I spent the next few hours immersed in research, learning about onion routing, hidden services, and the precautions one supposedly needed to take before even considering venturing into this digital underworld. Part of me knew I was treading on dangerous ground, that this was a realm where things could quickly go wrong. Yet, the thrill of the unknown, the promise of uncovering secrets hidden from the mainstream internet, was too enticing to ignore. Finally, armed with a virtual machine, a VPN, and the Tor browser, I took the plunge. The initial experience was underwhelming. Most of the links I found were dead, leading to nothing but error messages. The sites that did load were often slow and clunky, filled with bizarre and often disturbing content that seemed more like shock value than anything truly sinister. I told myself that this was it, that the dark web was nothing more than a digital wasteland, a haven for outdated websites and conspiracy theorists. But then I stumbled upon a hidden wiki, meticulously curated with links to various dark web services. Unlike the haphazard collections I had encountered before, this wiki seemed organized, almost professional in its presentation. It listed categories ranging from marketplaces for anonymous goods to forums discussing niche and often unsettling topics. It was here, amidst the seemingly endless list of links, that I saw at a forum with a name that sent a shiver down my spine. Untraceable Services. The name itself was enough to pique my interest, but it was the brief description that truly grabbed my attention. A platform for those seeking discrete solutions to unique problems. The language was vague, almost euphemistic, but there was an underlying sense of menace that was palpable. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding slightly in my chest. This felt different. This felt like I was stepping into a realm where the rules of the normal world didn't apply, where the consequences of my actions could be far more severe than a simple virus or a stolen password. Despite the growing sense of unease, my curiosity won out. I clicked on the link, and after a few agonizingly slow seconds, the forum loaded. It looked surprisingly ordinary, almost like any other online message board. There were different threads with generic titles, but one in particular stood out: Personalized Solutions. The title itself was innocuous enough, but something about it felt deeply unsettling in the context of a forum dedicated to untraceable services. I clicked on the thread, and the first post was a simple question: looking for specialized assistance with a delicate matter. Discretion and anonymity are paramount. Willing to compensate generously. The replies that followed chilled me to the bone. They were cryptic, filled with coded language and veiled threats. People offered customized arrangements, tailored interventions, and unique resolutions. It was clear that they weren't talking about anything legal or ethical. The implications were horrifying, suggesting a marketplace for services that were deeply disturbing and potentially violent. I scrolled through the thread, my stomach churning with each new reply. The casualness with which these people discussed such dark topics was deeply unsettling. It was like peering into the abyss, into the darkest corners of human nature. I wanted to look away, but to close my laptop and pretend I had never seen any of this. But a morbid fascination kept me glued to the screen, a terrifying compulsion to understand the depths of depravity I had stumbled upon. Then, I saw it. A user with a seemingly random handle had replied to the original post with a single chilling sentence: "Perhaps I can offer a more personalized solution. Check your porch." The simplicity and directness of the message sent a jolt of pure fear through me. What did they mean, check your porch? Was this some kind of twisted joke? Or was it something more sinister? My mind raced, trying to make sense of the cryptic message. I told myself it was probably nothing, just some edgy dark web user trying to sound intimidating. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing rapidly. Driven by a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread, I clicked on the user's profile. There was no personal information, no posts other than the one I had just read. The profile picture was a default avatar, a blank silhouette against a gray background. There was nothing there that could tell me anything about this person, nothing that could explain their chilling message. And then I saw it. Below the default avatar, in the section where users sometimes uploaded additional images, there was one single photograph. It was grainy and taken from a slightly low angle, but there was no mistaking it. It was a picture of my front porch. The blood ran cold in my veins. My heart leaped into my throat, and a wave of nausea washed over me. There, in stark detail, was the familiar wooden railing, the potted fern I had bought just last week, even the slightly crooked welcome mat that I had been meaning to straighten. It was undeniably my house. How could they have this picture? How could someone on this dark web forum know what my front porch looked like? The implications were terrifying. It meant that someone, somewhere, was watching me. Someone knew who I was, where I lived, and they had somehow connected my online activity on this obscure forum to my real-world activity. The casual curiosity I had felt just hours ago had vanished, replaced by a primal fear that gripped me like a vise. This was no longer a game. This was real. And I had somehow stumbled into something far more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. I quickly closed the forum, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I shut down my virtual machine, disconnected from the VPN, and unplugged my computer from the internet. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like I was being watched from the shadows. I stood up and walked over to the window, peering out into the darkness. The streetlights cast long, eerie shadows across the lawn. Every rustle of leaves, every passing car sent a jolt of paranoia through me. Was someone out there? Were they watching me right now? I had gone looking for the hidden corners of the internet, and it seemed like I had found them. But what I had found was far more terrifying than I could have ever anticipated. And I had a sinking feeling that my curiosity had just unleashed something truly evil into my life. The night was just beginning, and I knew with a chilling certainty that my life would never be the same. The image of my front porch burned into my mind, a stark and unsettling reminder of the digital abyss I had peered into. For a long moment, I simply stood frozen, staring out at the darkness beyond my window, my breath catching in my throat. The familiar outline of my neighbor's oak tree against the night sky, the faint glow of the street lamp illuminating the sidewalk, everything seemed normal. Yet a profound sense of unease settled over me. It was as if the veil between my safe, ordinary life and the terrifying reality I had glimpsed on the dark web had been irrevocably torn. My first instinct was to run, to grab my keys, jump in my car, and drive as far away as possible. But where would I go, and what would that accomplish? Whoever had posted that picture, whoever had written that chilling message, already knew where I lived. Fleeing wouldn't make them disappear. It might even provoke them. Instead, I found myself drawn back to the window, my gaze fixated on my front porch. It looked exactly as it did in the grainy photograph, the same arrangement of potted plants, the same slightly askew welcome mat. There was nothing out of the ordinary, no obvious signs of surveillance or intrusion. But the knowledge that someone had captured that image, that they were aware of this mundane detail of my life, was deeply disturbing. It felt like a violation, an invasion of my privacy in the most intimate way possible. I told myself it had to be a coincidence, a twisted prank by some bored dark web user trying to scare people. Maybe they had just grabbed a random image of a porch off the internet and were using it to play mind games. But the specificity of the details, the unique placement of the flower pots, the small crack in the concrete step that I had been meaning to repair, made that explanation feel flimsy and unconvincing. Driven by a morbid curiosity and a desperate need to know more, I cautiously powered my computer back on. My hand still trembled slightly as I navigated through the layers of security, the VPN, and the Tor browser. The familiar purple onion icon seemed to pulse with an ominous glow on my screen. I hesitated for a moment before entering the untraceable services forum. Part of me screamed to stay away, to forget I had ever seen it. But the image of my porch, the chilling message, had ignited a terrifying need for answers. I had to know who was behind this and why they had targeted me. The forum loaded slowly, the familiar layout now imbued with a sense of dread. I navigated back to the personalized solutions thread, my heart pounding in my chest. The original post and the subsequent replies were still there, each one now carrying a more sinister weight in my mind. I searched for the user who had posted the message about checking my porch. Their handle was a string of random characters, nothing that offered any clue to their identity. I clicked on their profile again, hoping that maybe I had missed something the first time. But it was still the same, a default avatar and the single, horrifying image of my front porch. There were no other posts, no other activity. It was as if this user had created the account solely to post that message and upload that picture. A cold wave of fear washed over me. This wasn't some random prank. This felt deliberate, targeted. But why me? I had never engaged with anyone on the forum, had never posted or replied to any threads. I was just a lurker, an accidental observer, who had stumbled upon something he shouldn't have seen. I tried to think logically, to find a rational explanation. Could someone I knew in real life be playing a cruel joke on me? It seemed unlikely. My friends weren't the type to delve into the dark web. And even if they were, this felt too malicious, too invasive to be a prank. The only other possibility was that my initial foray into the dark web had somehow flagged me, had somehow made me a target. But how? I had taken all the precautions I knew using a VPN, a virtual machine, the Tor browser. I hadn't clicked on any suspicious links or downloaded any files. I had simply observed. As I scrolled through the other replies in the thread, I noticed a few other messages that now seemed particularly unsettling. One user had written, "Sometimes, the most personalized solutions involve a little observation." Another had replied, "Discretion is key. We prefer to gather all necessary information beforehand." These vague statements, which had seemed disturbing before, now took on a terrifying new meaning. Were they talking about stalking? Surveillance? Had I stumbled into a forum where people offered services like harassment, intimidation, or even worse? The thought made my stomach churn. I felt a growing sense of paranoia creeping into my mind. Every sound from outside my apartment, the distant siren, the barking dog, the hum of the refrigerator seemed to amplify my anxiety. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unseen eyes were observing my every move. I decided to do something reckless. I created a new anonymous account on the forum. My hands shook as I typed in a username and a temporary email address. I knew it was dangerous to engage, to make my presence known, but I felt a desperate need to understand what was happening. I navigated back to the personalized solutions thread and composed a carefully worded message. I saw a post mentioning checking a porch. I wrote, trying to sound vague and non-threatening, "Can anyone provide more context? I'm new here and trying to understand how things work." I hesitated for a long moment before clicking the post button. It felt like throwing a stone into a dark abyss, not knowing what might emerge from the shadows in response. I refreshed the page repeatedly, my heart pounding with anticipation and dread. Minutes stretched into an eternity, but there was no reply. The thread remained the same, the chilling messages unchanged. It was as if my post had been swallowed by the digital void. Frustrated and increasingly terrified, I decided to try a different approach. I searched the forum for keywords like observation, surveillance, and porch. The search results yielded a few scattered threads, mostly filled with cryptic and unsettling discussions about gathering information and maintaining anonymity. None of them offered any direct answers or explanations for the picture I had seen. I spent hours scouring the forum, my eyes scanning countless posts, trying to piece together the puzzle of what I had stumbled upon. The more I read, the more disturbed I became. It was clear that this was a place where people discussed and potentially offered incredibly dark and illegal services. The veiled language, the coded references, all pointed towards activities that were deeply unethical and likely criminal. As the night wore on, my fear and paranoia intensified. Every creak of the floorboards in my apartment, every flicker of the lights sent a jolt of anxiety through me. I kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see a shadowy figure lurking in the darkness. Sleep was out of the question. My mind raced with terrifying possibilities. Who was the person behind that profile? Why had they posted a picture of my porch? Were they just trying to scare me? Or was it a prelude to something more sinister? I thought about contacting the authorities, but the forum's emphasis on traceable services made me hesitant. Would they even be able to help? And what would I tell them? I saw a picture of my porch on a dark web forum. It sounded absurd, almost unbelievable. I had no concrete evidence of any wrongdoing, just a chilling image and a cryptic message. As the first rays of dawn began to filter through my window, casting long shadows across my apartment, I felt a profound sense of isolation and vulnerability. I had ventured into a world I didn't understand, and now it felt like that world had reached out and touched me. I knew I couldn't just ignore what had happened. I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen that picture, hadn't read those chilling messages. Something had shifted, and I had a terrifying feeling that my life was no longer entirely my own. The digital shadows had bled into my reality, and I was trapped in a nightmare of my own making, a nightmare that had only just begun. The question now was, what were they planning to do next? And what could I possibly do to stop them? The sun might be rising, but for me the darkness was only just beginning to deepen. The dawn brought no comfort, only a stark, gray light that seemed to amplify the shadows in my apartment. I hadn't slept a wink, my mind a whirlwind of fear and speculation. Every sound outside sent a jolt of anxiety through me, and I found myself constantly peering out the windows, scanning the street for any sign of the unknown threat. The rational part of my brain kept trying to find logical explanations. Maybe it was a case of mistaken identity. Maybe someone on that forum had a porch that looked similar to mine. But the chilling specificity of the details in the photograph, coupled with the direct message, made it impossible to dismiss entirely. I spent the morning in a state of nervous agitation, pacing around my apartment, jumping at every unexpected noise. I considered calling the police again. But what would I tell them? Someone on the dark web posted a picture of my porch. It sounded ridiculous, and I had no real evidence of any crime. They would probably think I was crazy. As the day wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept catching myself looking over my shoulder, even inside my own apartment. The mundane routines of my life, making coffee, checking emails, now felt fraught with a sense of unease. Driven by a desperate need to feel safer, I started taking precautions. I checked all the locks on my doors and windows, even though I knew it probably wouldn't be enough. If someone had managed to find my address and take a picture of my porch, a simple lock wasn't going to stop them if they really wanted to get in. I also decided to take my computer to a local repair shop and have the hard drive wiped clean. It felt like a drastic measure, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my online activity had somehow led to this. Maybe by erasing everything, I could sever the connection, disappear back into the anonymity of the internet. The technician at the shop looked at me strangely when I requested a complete wipe. No questions asked. I just mumbled something about a virus and paid in cash, eager to get out of there. That night, I stayed at a cheap motel on the other side of town. It felt paranoid, maybe even a little silly, but I couldn't bring myself to go back to my apartment. The thought of sleeping in the same bed, under the same roof that had been photographed by an unknown entity, was unbearable. The motel room was sterile and impersonal, but it felt marginally safer than my own home. I spent another sleepless night, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with unanswered questions. Who were these people on the forum? What did they want? And why had they chosen me? The next day, I reluctantly returned to my apartment. I knew I couldn't run forever. I had to face this somehow, even if I didn't know what this was. Over the next few weeks, I tried to return to some semblance of normalcy, but the feeling of being watched never truly went away. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, scrutinizing every car that drove by, every stranger I passed on the street. I installed security cameras around my apartment, hoping that at least I would have some warning if anything happened. I also couldn't resist the urge to check the untraceable services forum again, using a different computer and even more convoluted network setup. I searched for the user who had posted the picture, but their profile remained unchanged, a silent, unsettling reminder of the threat. The personalized solutions thread was still active, with new cryptic messages appearing regularly. I even saw a few more posts with the same chilling phrase, "Check your porch." It seemed like it had become some kind of twisted inside joke among the forum members. One evening, I was sitting in my living room, nervously watching the feeds from my security cameras. Everything seemed quiet outside. Suddenly, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from an address I didn't recognize. My heart pounded as I opened it. The subject line was blank, and the body of the email contained only a single image. It was another picture of my front porch, but this time it was taken from a different angle, a slightly closer perspective. And in the background, barely visible in the shadows, I could see the faint outline of someone standing across the street, looking directly at my apartment. A wave of pure terror washed over me. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone was actively watching me. They were escalating things, letting me know that they were still there, still aware of my every move. I slammed my laptop shut, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I felt trapped, helpless. I had no idea who these people were, what they wanted, or how to make them stop. Over the next few months, the intrusions became more frequent, more unsettling. I would receive anonymous emails with pictures taken from different angles around my apartment. Sometimes, the images would include subtle details that only someone who had been watching me for a while would notice. The way I left my blinds slightly ajar. The specific mug I used for my morning coffee that was visible on the kitchen counter. I started experiencing strange occurrences around my apartment. Lights would flicker inexplicably. I would hear faint noises outside my door in the middle of the night. Once, I found a small, unmarked package on my doorstep containing nothing but a single black feather. My paranoia spiraled out of control. I became withdrawn, suspicious of everyone I knew. I stopped going out, afraid of what might be waiting for me. My once organized apartment became cluttered with unopened mail and takeout containers. I was living in a constant state of fear, trapped in my own home, a prisoner of an unseen enemy. I tried to find help, to talk to someone about what was happening, but I didn't know who to trust. How could I explain this to anyone without sounding completely insane? The dark web, untraceable services, personalized solutions, it all sounded like something out of a bad movie. One night, I woke up to a chilling sound. It was a faint scratching noise coming from just outside my bedroom window. My heart leaped into my throat. I lay frozen in bed, listening intently as the scratching continued, a slow, deliberate sound that sent shivers down my spine. I slowly reached for my phone, my hand trembling as I dialed 911. But as I was about to press the call button, the scratching stopped. Silence descended upon the room, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. I waited for what felt like an eternity, every muscle in my body tense. But the scratching didn't resume. After a while, I cautiously got out of bed and crept over to the window, peering through the blinds. The darkness outside was absolute. I couldn't see anything. I stood there for a long time, my eyes straining to penetrate the darkness, but there was nothing. Just the familiar shapes of the trees in my backyard silhouetted against the night sky. I went back to bed, but sleep eluded me. The scratching sound echoed in my mind, a chilling reminder that I was not alone. The next morning, as I was getting ready for the day, I noticed something strange on my front porch. There, right in the center of the welcome mat, was a small, intricately carved wooden bird. It looked old, almost antique, and its eyes seemed to stare directly at my front door. A cold dread washed over me. This wasn't random. This was a message. But what did it mean? I cautiously opened the door and picked up the wooden bird. It felt strangely heavy in my hand. As I examined it more closely, I noticed a small inscription carved into its base. It was a single word, written in a language I didn't recognize. I took a picture of the inscription and tried to translate it online, but the search yielded no results. The language was obscure, unknown. I placed the wooden bird on my desk, a silent, ominous presence in my apartment. It felt like a final, chilling confirmation that the people on the dark web hadn't forgotten about me. They were still watching, still toying with me. I don't know what they want. I don't know what their ultimate goal is. All I know is that my life has been irrevocably changed by my curiosity. I ventured into the shadows, and now the shadows have followed me home. I am constantly looking over my shoulder, living in fear of the unknown. Sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I still hear that faint scratching sound outside my window. And I know with a chilling certainty that they are still out there watching, waiting. And I have no idea when or how it will all end. Perhaps this is my personalized solution. A slow descent into paranoia and fear, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurks just beneath the surface of our seemingly safe digital world. And maybe, just maybe, the picture of my porch was just the beginning. My name is Ben, and I've always considered myself a pretty rational guy. I work as a software developer, a world of logic and predictable outcomes. Or at least, that's what I used to believe. The internet, for all its chaotic corners, felt like something I could navigate, understand. But what happened to my friend Sarah shattered that illusion, pulling me into a digital abyss I never knew existed, a place where the rules of the real world seemed to melt away. Sarah and I have been friends since college. She's bright, funny, and the kind of person who lights up a room just by being in it. So, when she first told me about the cyber stalking, I initially tried to downplay it, thinking it was probably some misguided admirer or a troll looking for attention. I told her to block the person, change her privacy settings, the usual advice you find on those online safety guides. We even reported it to the social media platforms, but the messages kept coming, more persistent, more personal, more unsettling. It started with vague comments on her posts, and then moved to direct messages filled with details about her day, things she hadn't shared publicly. It escalated quickly. The stalker knew her routine, where she went for coffee, the route she took to work. They started sending her pictures taken from across the street, from inside her favorite bookstore. The messages became increasingly threatening, hinting at physical harm, making her terrified to leave her apartment. Sarah went to the police, but they said there wasn't much they could do until a direct threat was made, a tangible act committed. They advised her to keep a record of everything, to be vigilant, but their words offered little comfort as the digital intrusions continued to escalate. Sarah was losing sleep, constantly looking over her shoulder, her vibrant personality fading under the weight of this unseen tormentor. I felt helpless. My usual tech-savvy solutions were useless against this insidious invasion of her life. I spent hours researching online, looking for any way to stop this. I scoured forums dedicated to online harassment. Read countless articles on cyberstalking, desperate for a solution. That's when I stumbled upon a suggestion, buried deep within a thread on a less reputable corner of the internet. Someone mentioned reputation management, services on the dark web. The dark web. The name itself sent a shiver down my spine. It was the stuff of urban legends, a hidden part of the internet where illegal activities thrived, where anonymity was absolute. I had always steered clear of it, content with the familiar landscape of the surface web. But seeing the fear in Sarah's eyes, the desperation in her voice, I knew I had to consider any option, no matter how risky it seemed. My initial attempts to access the dark web were clumsy. I downloaded Tor, the browser everyone talked about, and fumbled my way through the unfamiliar interface. The URLs were strings of random characters, the sites cryptic and often unsettling. It felt like stepping into a digital underworld, a place where the normal rules of engagement didn't apply. I spent days navigating this shadowy realm, searching for any mention of reputation management. Many of the sites I found were clearly scams, promising impossible feats for exorbitant amounts of cryptocurrency. Others seemed overtly malicious, offering services that were clearly illegal and deeply disturbing. It was a rabbit hole of depravity, and more than once I considered giving up, convinced that this was a dead end, a dangerous distraction from finding a real solution. But then I found it, a site with a surprisingly professional layout, at least by dark web standards. It was called The Eraser. The landing page was stark with minimalist design and a single tagline, "Your past." They offered a range of services, from removing unwanted search results to completely erasing online profiles. And then I saw a section dedicated to reputation defense, which specifically mentioned dealing with online harassment and cyberstalking. The site claimed to employ advanced techniques and untraceable methods to eliminate unwanted information and protect their clients from online threats. There were testimonials, though of course, their authenticity was impossible to verify. But the language they used was confident, almost clinical, which somehow felt more reassuring than the flashy promises of other sites. They had a contact form, which I filled out with a brief description of Sarah's situation, being careful not to reveal any personally identifiable information. Within a few hours I received a reply. It was a heavily encrypted message, asking for more details about the stalking and the information Sarah wanted removed. They also requested a consultation fee in Bitcoin, a relatively small amount compared to some of the other sites I had seen. I hesitated. This felt wrong, like I was venturing into territory I didn't understand. But the thought of Sarah's fear, of the constant anxiety that gripped her, pushed me forward. I provided more details, omitting anything that directly linked her to the request. I paid the consultation fee, the transaction feeling strangely anonymous and detached. A few days later I received another message. They had reviewed the information and offered a comprehensive solution for a significantly larger sum of Bitcoin. It was a lot of money, more than I was comfortable spending, but I was desperate. I believed I was helping Sarah, taking decisive action against her tormentor. After a sleepless night of deliberation, I made the payment. The site promised results within a week. Those 7 days felt like an eternity. Sarah was still receiving messages, though they seemed to have decreased in frequency. I kept checking the dark website, looking for any updates, any confirmation that their methods were working. Then it happened. One morning, Sarah called me, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. The messages had stopped. Completely. Her social media accounts were quiet, her email inbox empty. It was as if her stalker had vanished into thin air. I felt a surge of triumph. It had worked. The eraser had done what they promised. I had ventured into the dark corners of the internet and emerged victorious, having protected my friend from a terrifying ordeal. Sarah was overjoyed, finally able to breathe without the constant fear of another message, another intrusion. We celebrated, relieved that this nightmare was finally over. But the relief was short-lived. Exactly 1 week after the messages stopped, Sarah received a package in the mail. It was anonymously delivered, with no return address. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a small, intricately carved wooden bird. It was beautiful in a strange, unsettling way. But it wasn't just any wooden bird. It was a replica of a bird Sarah had carved herself in high school, a personal project she had long forgotten about, and had never shown anyone outside of a very small circle of close friends, a circle that definitely did not include her stalker. A few days later, another package arrived. This time, it was a vintage edition of her favorite childhood book, a book she had mentioned in passing during a conversation with me months ago. A conversation I was sure no one else had overheard. Each gift was innocuous on its own, almost thoughtful. But the context, the intimate knowledge they revealed, sent a chill down our spines. It was like the stalker hadn't disappeared at all. They had simply changed tactics. The messages had stopped, but now these physical tokens, these carefully chosen gifts, were far more disturbing. They were a constant reminder that the stalker was still out there, still watching, still intimately aware of Sarah's life. The anonymity of the gifts was even more terrifying than the direct messages. It felt like the stalker was toying with us, enjoying our fear, demonstrating their continued control. That's when the horrifying realization hit me. By going to the dark web, by seeking out this reputation management service, had I inadvertently made things worse? Had I simply given the stalker new ideas, a new way to terrorize Sarah? The thought filled me with a sickening dread, a gnawing guilt that kept me awake at night. I had tried to help, but what if my actions had only plunged us deeper into this nightmare? The rational part of my brain, the part that believed in logic and predictable outcomes, was screaming at me, telling me I had made a terrible mistake. The darkness I had peered into had not only looked back, it had reached out and touched us. And I had a terrible feeling that this was only the beginning. The arrival of the wooden bird was the turning point. It shifted the atmosphere from one of cautious relief to one of palpable dread. The silence from the digital world was now filled with the tangible presence of these unsettling gifts. Each package was a violation, a reminder that we were still being watched, perhaps even more closely than before. Sarah was understandably terrified. The anonymous messages, while threatening, had a certain distance to them, a barrier of the screen. These gifts, however, were real, physical objects placed deliberately into her hands. It felt more intimate, more invasive, like the stalker was stepping out of the shadows and into her personal space, albeit indirectly. We tried to figure out how the stalker knew about the wooden bird. It was something she had made years ago, tucked away in a box in her attic. She hadn't spoken about it in ages. The only person who might have remembered it was me, and I certainly hadn't told anyone. The realization sent a shiver of unease down my spine. Could our conversations be monitored? Was her apartment bugged? Paranoia began to creep into every corner of our thoughts. The second gift, the vintage book, only amplified our fear. Again, it was something deeply personal, a fleeting mention in a casual conversation. It was the kind of detail that would be easily forgotten by anyone who wasn't paying very close attention, or someone who had access to our private communications. We went back to the police, showing them the gifts, explaining the significance of each item. They took our concerns seriously this time, acknowledging that the shift in tactics was indeed disturbing. They opened an investigation, but without any direct threats or a way to trace the gifts, their hands seemed tied. They suggested Sarah install security cameras in her apartment and change her phone number again, but it felt like putting a band-aid on a gaping wound. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was responsible for this escalation. Before I contacted the eraser, the stalking was confined to the digital realm. Now, it had bled into the physical world, becoming more tangible, more menacing. Had I inadvertently given the stalker a new playbook? Had my attempt to erase their online presence simply forced them to find other, more insidious ways to torment Sarah? Driven by guilt and a desperate need to fix what I had done, I decided to delve back into the dark web. The thought made my stomach churn, but I felt I had no other choice. I needed to understand who these people at the eraser were, what kind of methods they employed, and if they had somehow alerted the stalker to our efforts. Navigating the dark web felt even more unsettling this time. The initial novelty had worn off, replaced by a gnawing sense of unease. Every link I clicked, every site I visited, felt like a step further into a dangerous and unpredictable world. I tried to find the eraser's site again, but the URLs on the dark web were ephemeral, constantly changing. It took me hours of searching, sifting through countless shady marketplaces and forums, before I finally found a link that seemed to lead back to them. The site looked the same. The minimalist design and the ominous tagline still prominent. I tried to log into my account, but it seemed to have been deactivated. There was no way to contact them directly, no customer support email or forum. It was as if they existed only as a fleeting shadow in the digital ether. Frustrated and increasingly anxious, I started searching for any mention of the eraser on dark web forums, hoping to find some information about their reputation or methods. What I found was a mixed bag. Some users claimed they were legitimate, that they had successfully helped them remove unwanted information. Others warned that they were a scam, taking people's money and delivering nothing. And then, there were the whispers. The unsettling rumors of something darker, something more sinister. A few cryptic posts hinted that the eraser wasn't just about deleting information. Some suggested they had connections to other, more nefarious services, that they might even facilitate certain kinds of interactions. The language was vague coded, but the implications were chilling. Could the eraser have somehow tipped off the stalker, perhaps even provided them with more information about Sarah? The thought was horrifying, but it seemed increasingly plausible. Days turned into weeks, and the gifts continued to arrive. They varied in nature, but each one was deeply personal, a twisted reminder of the stalker's intimate knowledge of Sarah's life. One week, it was a specific brand of tea she used to drink in college. Another week, it was a keychain she had lost years ago. Each item was carefully chosen, designed to maximize her fear and make her feel constantly exposed. The gifts weren't threatening in themselves, but the underlying message was clear. I know you. I see you. I can reach you. The shift from direct threats to these subtle, yet deeply unsettling gestures was a calculated move, designed to erode Sarah's sense of safety and control. I felt increasingly helpless, watching Sarah live in constant fear, knowing that my attempt to help her had potentially made things worse. The guilt was a heavy weight pressing down on me, making it hard to think, hard to sleep. I started obsessively reviewing every interaction I had ever had with Sarah, every conversation, every shared detail, trying to pinpoint how the stalker could have obtained such specific information. Could her phone be compromised? Was her computer hacked? We ran multiple scans, changed all her passwords, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The stalker seemed to be operating in the shadows, leaving no digital footprints, relying on information they had somehow already gathered. The police investigation stalled. Without any concrete evidence of a crime, they couldn't do much more than offer advice and patrol her neighborhood occasionally. Sarah was becoming increasingly withdrawn, isolating herself in her apartment, afraid to go out, afraid of what might be waiting for her. One night, I was up late, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I kept replaying the events of the past few weeks, trying to find a pattern, a clue. And then, it hit me. The dark website, the eraser, their tagline, your past, deleted. But what if it wasn't just about deleting the past? What if it was also about creating a new narrative? Manipulating information, perhaps even orchestrating events? The thought sent a jolt of ice through my veins. Could the eraser be more than just a reputation management service? Could they be involved in the stalking itself? It seemed far-fetched, paranoid even, but the pieces started to fit together in a disturbing way. the sudden stop of the online messages, the immediate shift to highly personalized gifts. It was almost as if the stalker had outsourced the initial phase of the harassment to the eraser, and then taken over with a more personal, more psychologically damaging approach. But why? What would be their motive? It didn't make sense. Unless the initial cyberstalking was just a way to identify a target, to gather information, and then the eraser stepped in as a middleman, offering a solution that actually benefited the stalker in some twisted way. The thought was terrifying. Had I not only failed to help Sarah, but actually played right into the stalker's hands? Had I paid them to escalate the harassment, to make it more personal, more terrifying? The guilt intensified, morphing into a cold, hard knot of fear in my stomach. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. Going back to the dark web seemed pointless, possibly even dangerous. The police couldn't help. Sarah was living in a state of constant anxiety. I felt like we were trapped in a nightmare, with no way out, and I was the one who had opened the door. The carefully constructed world of logic and predictability I had once inhabited had crumbled, replaced by a terrifying reality where unseen forces manipulated our lives. And the darkest corners of the internet held secrets far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. The gifts kept coming, each one a mocking reminder of my failure and the stalker's unwavering presence in our lives. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was far from over. The realization that the eraser might be complicit, or even the orchestrator of the escalating harassment, haunted my every waking moment. It was a sickening thought, the idea that I had unwittingly paid someone to torment my friend. I spent hours trying to rationalize it, to find another explanation, but the pieces kept falling back into that disturbing configuration. The abrupt end of the online stalking coinciding with the start of the personalized gifts felt too deliberate, too coordinated to be a coincidence. I knew I couldn't go to the police with this theory. It was based on nothing but a gut feeling and some vague interpretations of dark web forum posts. They would likely dismiss it as paranoia, a byproduct of the stress we were both under. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the verge of uncovering something truly dark. Something that extended far beyond a simple case of cyberstalking. My focus shifted from trying to stop the gifts to understanding their source. Each item, while seemingly random, held a deep personal significance for Sarah. It wasn't just about knowing her. It was about knowing her intimately, knowing details that only a handful of people would be aware of. This suggested that the stalker either had a very close connection to Sarah or had somehow managed to infiltrate her life on a level we couldn't comprehend. I started subtly questioning Sarah about her past, trying to jog her memory about anyone who might hold a grudge or have an unhealthy obsession with her. We went through old yearbooks, social media contacts, even past relationships. Each conversation was emotionally draining, forcing Sarah to relive past anxieties and insecurities. But we found nothing concrete, no one who immediately stood out as a likely suspect. The gifts continued to arrive with unsettling regularity, usually once or twice a week. They ranged from sentimental trinkets from her childhood to obscure references to inside jokes we shared. One week, it was a mixed CD with songs that were popular during a specific summer we spent together. Another week, it was a drawing she had made in elementary school that she thought had been lost years ago. Each item was a carefully chosen breadcrumb, leading us down a path of fear and confusion. I decided to take a more direct approach, albeit a risky one. I created a new anonymous account on the dark web and started frequenting the same forums where I had found information about the eraser. I tried to engage in conversations, subtly probing for information about the site and its operators. Most of the responses were vague and unhelpful, but I did come across a few more unsettling whispers. Some users hinted at the eraser having connections to bespoke harassment services, where clients could commission highly personalized and psychologically damaging campaigns against their targets. The implications were chilling. Could someone have hired the eraser to orchestrate this entire thing, using the initial cyberstalking as a way to gather information, and then transitioning to these more intimate and unsettling gifts? It seemed like a twisted form of psychological torture, designed to break Sarah down completely. The thought of someone deliberately orchestrating this level of torment made my blood run cold. I felt a surge of anger, a desperate need to confront whoever was behind this. But I was operating in the dark, with no names, no faces, just cryptic usernames and encrypted messages. Then, one day, Sarah received a gift that was different from the others. It was a small, antique music box. When she opened it, it played a lullaby, a tune that her mother used to sing to her when she was a child. Sarah's mother had passed away years ago, and this particular lullaby was something very personal, something she rarely spoke about. This gift hit Sarah harder than any of the others. It felt like a direct violation, a desecration of a cherished memory. She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, the weight of the past few weeks finally overwhelming her. Seeing her in such distress fueled my anger and desperation. I knew I had to do something, anything, to stop this. That night I made a reckless decision. Using my anonymous dark web account, I sent a direct message to a user who had mentioned the eraser in a particularly ominous context. I didn't reveal my identity or Sarah's, but I asked pointed questions about their services, hinting that I knew they were involved in something more than just reputation management. To my surprise, I received a reply within hours. The message was short and cryptic. Curiosity killed the cat. Some doors are best left unopened. It was a clear warning, but it also confirmed my suspicions. They knew I was asking questions and they didn't like it. The next day, I started noticing strange things. My internet connection flickered intermittently. My phone battery drained unusually quickly. I had the unsettling feeling that I was being watched, both online and in the real world. I started taking precautions, using a VPN covering my webcam, being more careful about my surroundings. Then, one evening, I received an anonymous email. It wasn't threatening, but it contained a single chilling sentence. "We know who your friend is, Ben, and we know you tried to help her." It was the first time my name had been directly linked to the situation. The stalker, or whoever was behind this, knew who I was, and they knew I was trying to intervene. Fear gripped me. This was no longer just about Sarah. I had become a target as well. I had poked a bear, and now it was awake and angry. I knew I had to be careful, that any wrong move could put both Sarah and me in even greater danger. The gifts to Sarah continued, each one more psychologically jarring than the last. It was clear that the stalker was enjoying our fear, reveling in their ability to manipulate us. The silence from the online world was now deafening, replaced by the tangible presence of these carefully curated tokens of terror. I felt trapped, caught in a web of fear and uncertainty. The dark web, which I had initially seen as a potential solution, had become the source of our nightmare. I had ventured into its shadows, hoping to find a way out, but I had only stumbled deeper into its darkness. The final gift arrived a few weeks later. It was a small, unmarked package. Inside, Sarah found a single photograph. It was a picture of her sleeping in her bed, taken from inside her apartment. The angle suggested that the photographer was standing right next to her. That was the breaking point. Sarah completely shut down, retreating into herself, unable to speak, her eyes filled with a terror I had never seen before. The invasion of her privacy, the sheer audacity of the act, was more than she could bear. As for me, I was filled with a cold, burning rage. I had to do something, anything, to stop this. I knew I was out of my depth, dealing with forces I didn't understand. But I couldn't stand by and watch Sarah be destroyed. I decided to take one last, desperate gamble. Using everything I had learned from my forays into the dark web, I tried to trace the Bitcoin transactions I had made to the eraser. It was a long shot, but I had to try. After days of painstaking effort, sifting through blockchain data, I managed to find a potential lead, a connection to a cryptocurrency exchange located in a country with lax regulations. I knew it was a long and dangerous path, but I felt I had no other choice. I had to follow this lead, to try and uncover the identity of the people behind the eraser, the people who had turned our lives into a living hell. I didn't know what I would find, or what I would do when I found it, but I knew I couldn't live with the guilt of standing by while Sarah was being systematically terrorized. The darkness had shown its face, and I was determined to confront it no matter the cost. The line between trying to help and becoming consumed by the darkness had blurred, and I feared I was already teetering on the edge. But the story of Ben and Sarah was far from over. My name is Lisa Miller, and I've always been drawn to the shadowy corners of the internet, the places where whispers of the strange and unexplained linger. It wasn't a morbid fascination, exactly, but more of an academic curiosity. For my senior year college project, I decided to delve into the world of urban legends and their impact on modern culture. I wanted to explore why these often outlandish tales persisted, how they evolved, and what psychological needs they fulfilled. Little did I know, my research would lead me down a rabbit hole far darker and more terrifying than any legend I had ever encountered. The initial stages of my project were fairly standard. I spent hours in the university library, poring over books on folklore mythology and the burgeoning field of internet lore. I interviewed people who claimed to have experienced or heard credible accounts of urban legends, from the classic vanishing hitchhiker to more contemporary tales of cursed video games and haunted websites. It was fascinating, piecing together the threads of these narratives, tracing their origins, and analyzing their cultural significance. One particular category of urban legends that caught my attention was the realm of dark web mysteries. The dark web, that hidden underbelly of the internet accessible only through specialized software, was fertile ground for all sorts of sinister rumors. Tales of illicit marketplaces, gruesome videos, and perhaps most disturbingly, whispers of genuine paranormal activity streamed live for a select, anonymous audience. These were the stories that truly piqued my interest, the ones that blurred the lines between the digital and the supernatural. I came across a forum dedicated to obscure internet phenomena, a digital space where users traded cryptic links and shared their unsettling discoveries. It was in one of these threads, buried deep within a discussion about supposedly cursed URLs, that I first encountered the legend of the whispering static stream. The story went that somewhere on the dark web, there existed a live stream that initially appeared as nothing more than static. However, with prolonged viewing, the static would allegedly give way to faint whispers, often the names of the viewers themselves, followed by fleeting, disturbing images that seemed to be pulled directly from their personal lives. Most of the users on the forum dismissed it as an elaborate hoax, a piece of digital folklore designed to scare the gullible. Some speculated it was a sophisticated form of malware designed to harvest personal information, but a small, persistent minority claimed to have stumbled upon the stream and experienced the unsettling phenomena first-stream. Their descriptions were vague and often contradictory, but there was a consistent thread of fear and unease that ran through their accounts. Naturally, my academic curiosity got the better of me. I knew the risks involved in venturing into the dark web, the potential exposure to illegal content and malicious actors. I had read countless warnings about the dangers that lurked in those digital shadows. But the allure of potentially witnessing something truly unexplainable, something that could bridge the gap between urban legend and reality, was too strong to resist. I told myself it was purely for research purposes, that I would exercise extreme caution and disconnect immediately if anything felt genuinely threatening. I spent the next few days researching how to safely access the dark web. I downloaded the Tor browser, a tool that routes internet traffic through a series of encrypted nodes, making it virtually untraceable. I learned about the importance of using a VPN for an added layer of security, and the need to avoid revealing any personal information. I felt a strange mix of excitement and apprehension as I prepared to take my first steps into this clandestine digital world. Finally, the day came when I felt ready. I made sure my laptop was fully charged, and that I was alone in my apartment, the curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. I launched the Tor browser, the familiar onion logo appearing on my screen. The initial loading process felt slow and deliberate, adding to the sense of entering a hidden, forbidden space. Navigating the dark web was unlike anything I had experienced before. There were no search engines like Google to guide me. Instead, I relied on a few directories and hidden wikis that listed various onion addresses, the unique URLs used on the dark web. Most of the links were cryptic and often led to dead ends or sites that were clearly illegal and deeply disturbing. It was a chaotic and unsettling digital landscape, a far cry from the polished and user-friendly surface web I was accustomed to. After what felt like hours of searching, sifting through countless dubious links, I finally stumbled upon a forum that seemed to specialize in sharing links to unusual and potentially paranormal streams. The forum was sparsely populated, with most posts consisting of nothing more than a URL and a brief, often cryptic, description. And then I saw a thread titled simply, "The Whispering Static." The original post was short and to the point: live stream. Static at first. Listen closely. You might hear your name. Below it was a single onion link. My heart pounded in my chest. This was it. This was the link to the urban legend I had been researching. I hesitated for a moment, a wave of doubt washing over me. Was I really about to do this? Was I truly prepared for what I might find on the other side of that link? I thought about the warnings I had read, the potential dangers of the dark web, but the pull of the unknown was too strong to ignore. With a deep breath, I copied the link and pasted it into the Tor browser. The page loaded slowly, displaying a simple black screen with a small, embedded video player. The player was showing exactly what the legend described as static. Just a grainy, black and white field of visual noise, accompanied by a low, persistent hiss. It was anticlimactic, almost disappointing. For a moment, I wondered if the legend was just that, a legend, with no basis in reality. I considered closing the window, dismissing the whole thing as a waste of time. But something made me stay. Perhaps it was the hours I had already invested in my research. Or maybe it was a sliver of hope that there might be something more to this story. I turned up the volume on my laptop and stared intently at the static, waiting. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling longer than the last. The static remained unchanged, the hiss a constant drone in the otherwise silent room. My initial excitement began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of boredom. I was about to give up when I noticed something subtle. A slight shift in the pattern of the static, a fleeting distortion that was almost imperceptible. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes straining to discern any further changes. And then I heard it. A faint whisper, so quiet it was almost swallowed by the hiss of the static. It sounded like a voice just on the edge of hearing, a breathy murmur that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. I held my breath, straining my ears to catch any further sounds. The whisper came again, slightly louder this time, and I could just make out a syllable. It sounded like a name. But whose? I concentrated with all my might, trying to isolate the whisper from the static. And then it came again, clear as a bell, echoing in the darkness of my apartment. Liz, my blood ran cold. My own name, whispered from the depths of the dark web, from a stream that was supposed to be nothing but static. A wave of icy fear washed over me, prickling my skin and raising the hairs on the back of my neck. This wasn't just static. This was something else entirely, something wrong. I scrambled back from my laptop, my heart pounding in my chest like a trapped bird. How could it know my name? I hadn't entered any personal information on the site. The Tor browser was supposed to be anonymous. Yet, somehow, this thing on the other side of the screen knew who I was. I stared at the black screen, the static still hissing ominously. The whisper didn't come again immediately, and for a moment, I considered slamming my laptop shut and running as far away from it as possible. But the morbid curiosity that had led me here in the first place wouldn't let me. I had to know more. I had to understand what was happening. Slowly, cautiously, I leaned back towards the screen. The static continued, the low hiss a constant reminder of the unsettling whisper I had just heard. And then, the static began to shift again, more dramatically this time. The grainy patterns flickered and coalesced, forming fleeting, indistinct shapes. I squinted, trying to make sense of the rapidly changing images. They were dark and blurry, like half-forgotten nightmares. I saw glimpses of what looked like furniture, walls, the corner of a room. My mind struggled to piece together the fragments, to find some recognizable form in the chaos. And then, one of the fleeting images flashed into focus for a split second, and I gasped. I knew that room. I knew that wallpaper. I knew that particular arrangement of books on the shelf. It was my bedroom. The image vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the return of the relentless static. But the fleeting glimpse was enough. There was no mistaking it. The stream, this curse-lived feed from the depths of the dark web, was showing me images of my own bedroom, my private sanctuary, a place I thought was safe and secure. The blood drained from my face, leaving me feeling cold and clammy. The fear that had been a prickle on my skin now surged through me like an electric current, paralyzing me with terror. How was this possible? How could a random live stream on the dark web be showing me images from inside my own apartment? My mind raced, desperately trying to find a logical explanation. Could it be a coincidence? Could there be someone else with a bedroom that looked eerily similar to mine? But the feeling in the pit of my stomach told me otherwise. This wasn't a coincidence. This was something deliberate, something targeted. The whisper came again, faint but undeniably present, weaving its way through the static. This time it wasn't just my name. It was a question laced with a chilling, almost playful tone. "Are you watching, Lisa?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My voice had deserted me, trapped somewhere in the icy grip of fear. My eyes were glued to the screen, watching the static flicker and dance, waiting for the next fleeting image, the next terrifying glimpse into my own life. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if some unseen entity was peering into my most private space, watching my every move. The urban legend had become a terrifying reality. The whispering static stream was real, and it knew my name. It knew my bedroom, and it was watching me. I had stumbled upon something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined, and I had a terrifying feeling that my research project had just taken a very dark and personal turn. The safety of my anonymous online exploration had been shattered, replaced by a chilling sense of being observed, targeted, and utterly alone in the vast, uncaring expanse of the internet. The whispers had found me, and the static had shown me the truth. I was no longer just an observer. I was part of the story. The whispered question, "Are you watching, Lisa?" hung in the air, thick and heavy like a suffocating blanket. My fingers trembled as I instinctively reached for the laptop's power button, my mind screaming at me to shut it down, to sever the connection to this terrifying digital voyeur. But a strange paralysis gripped me, a morbid fascination that held me captive in front of the screen. It was as if some unseen force was compelling me to watch, to bear witness to whatever horrors the static might reveal next. I finally managed to break free from the initial shock and slammed my hand down on the power button. The laptop screen went black, plunging me into relative darkness. The only light source the faint glow of the city outside my window. I sat there for a moment, catching my breath, my heart still pounding erratically against my ribs. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by my own ragged breathing. A wave of relief washed over me. It was over. I had disconnected. Whatever that thing was on the dark web, it couldn't reach me now. I told myself it was just a trick, some elaborate hoax designed to scare people. Maybe someone had somehow hacked into my webcam, although that seemed unlikely given the security measures I had taken. Perhaps it was just a very unsettling coincidence. But the lingering fear refused to be dismissed. The whisper had been too clear, too personal. And the image of my bedroom, however fleeting, had been undeniably real. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled upon something truly malevolent, something that had somehow peered into the most private corners of my life. After a few minutes of sitting in the dark, trying to calm my racing thoughts, I decided to turn the laptop back on. I knew it was irrational, that I should probably just throw the damn thing out the window and pretend this whole thing never happened. But the academic in me, the part of me that was driven by curiosity and the need to understand, wouldn't let it go. I had to know if the stream was still there, if it had somehow followed me even after I had disconnected. With hesitant fingers, I pressed the power button again. The laptop whirred to life, the screen illuminating the room with its familiar glow. I waited for the operating system to load, my anxiety building with each passing second. Finally, I launched the Tor browser and navigated back to the forum where I had found the link. My hand hovered over the link to the whispering static stream. Part of me wanted to click it, to confront whatever was on the other side. But another part of me was terrified of what I might see, what I might hear. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, and clicked the link. The black screen with the embedded video player reappeared. And there it was, the static. The same grainy black and white noise, accompanied by the same low, persistent hiss. It was as if no time had passed, as if the stream had been waiting for me to return. I stared at the static, my senses on high alert, waiting for any sign of change. The hiss seemed louder now, more oppressive. The static flickered and danced, the patterns shifting and swirling in a seemingly random manner. But this time, I was watching more intently. my eyes scanning every inch of the screen for any anomaly. It wasn't long before I saw it. Another fleeting image, even clearer than the first. It was a shot of my desk. The cluttered surface covered with textbooks, papers, and pens. I could even make out the half-empty coffee mug sitting next to my keyboard. There was no doubt in my mind, it was my desk, in my apartment. The image vanished again, replaced by the relentless static. But the brief glimpse had sent a fresh wave of terror crashing over me. This wasn't a coincidence. This was definitely happening. Someone, or something, was showing me images from inside my own home through this cursed live stream on the dark web. The whispers started again, softer this time, almost like a gentle breeze carrying faint voices. I strained my ears, trying to decipher the words. They were fragmented and indistinct, like snippets of conversations overheard in a crowded room. I couldn't make out any specific phrases, but the sheer presence of the whispers, coming from this source of pure static, was enough to send shivers down my spine. Then my name, clear as day. Lisa. It was whispered again and again, a chorus of disembodied voices echoing in the digital darkness. Each repetition sent a jolt of fear through me, making my skin crawl. It felt like these unseen entities were calling out to me, trying to lure me further into their twisted game. The static began to change more rapidly now, the fleeting images appearing with increasing frequency. I saw glimpses of my living room, the worn armchair in the corner, the bookshelf filled with my favorite novels. Then, a shot of my kitchen, the dirty dishes piled in the sink, the magnet-covered refrigerator door. Each image was a violation, a terrifying intrusion into my private life. And then the images started to become more personal, more intimate. I saw a fleeting glimpse of my bed, the rumpled sheets and the pillow where my head had rested just hours before. Another flash showed my bathroom mirror, the toothbrush sitting in its holder, the half-empty tube of toothpaste. It was as if this stream had access to every corner of my apartment, observing my most mundane and private moments. The whispers intensified, no longer just my name, but fragments of words, phrases that seemed to be pulled from my own thoughts, my own memories. I heard a faint whisper of the title of the book I had been reading just before I went to bed last night. Then, another whisper. The name of a friend I had been talking to on the phone earlier that day. It was as if this entity was inside my head, sifting through my thoughts and memories, using them to taunt and terrify me. The static flickered violently, and for a brief moment, I saw an image that made my blood run cold. It was me. I was sitting at my desk, hunched over my laptop, exactly as I was at that very moment. The image was grainy and distorted, but there was no mistaking it. It was me, watching myself on the screen. The feeling of being watched intensified tenfold. It was no longer just a sense of digital intrusion. It felt like I was being observed in the real world, that there was someone, or something, in my apartment with me, watching my every move. I frantically scanned the room, my eyes darting from corner to corner, searching for any sign of another presence. But I was alone, or at least I thought I was. The whispers continued, now laced with a chilling laughter, a low, guttural sound that seemed to emanate from the very depths of the internet. The laughter echoed in my ears, mocking my fear, reveling in my terror. The static intensified, the fleeting images becoming more frequent and more disturbing. I saw another image of myself, this time lying in my bed asleep. The angle was strange, as if the camera was positioned directly above me, looking down. It was an intimate and vulnerable moment, captured and displayed for who knows how many anonymous viewers on the dark web. Panic began to set in. I felt trapped, exposed, utterly helpless. I had no idea what was happening, who or what was behind this stream. Was it a hacker, a stalker, or something far more sinister? Something paranormal that had somehow found a way to manifest itself through the digital realm. I tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Could it be a very sophisticated prank? Could someone have somehow set up cameras in my apartment without my knowledge? But the whispers, the way it seemed to know my thoughts and memories, defied any logical explanation. I desperately wanted to disconnect, to shut down my laptop and run away from this nightmare. But the morbid curiosity, the need to understand, still held me captive. I felt like a moth drawn to a flame, knowing it would be burned but unable to resist the irresistible allure. The static shifted again, and this time, the fleeting image lingered for a few seconds longer. It was a shot of my bedroom door, slightly ajar, and then a shadow moved in the periphery of the frame, a dark, indistinct shape lurking just beyond the doorway. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the screen, my eyes wide with terror, waiting to see what would emerge from the shadows. The whispers intensified, morphing into a single chilling word, repeated over and over again. Come. The image of the shadowy figure remained on the screen for what felt like an eternity, the static flickering around it like malevolent energy. The whispered invitation echoed in my mind, sending a wave of icy dread through my entire being. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that this was not just a prank. This was something real, something dangerous, and it was inviting me to step further into its terrifying world. I finally found the strength to move. With a strangled cry, I slammed the laptop shut, severing the connection to the whispering static stream. But the images, the whispers, the feeling of being watched, remained burned into my mind, a terrifying reminder of the darkness that lurked just beneath the surface of the digital world. And I had a horrifying feeling that even though the laptop was closed, the stream, or whatever it represented, was still watching me. The invitation to come echoed in the silence of my apartment, and I knew with growing certainty that my research project had just become a fight for my sanity, and perhaps even my life. The shadows beyond my own bedroom door suddenly felt a lot closer. The silence that followed the slamming shut of my laptop was anything but peaceful. It was a heavy, oppressive silence, punctuated by the frantic thumping of my own heart. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, huddled on my couch, staring at the closed laptop as if it were a venomous snake coiled and ready to strike. The images from the stream, my bedroom, my desk, myself sleeping, flashed behind my eyelids, each one a chilling reminder of the violation I had just experienced. Sleep was an impossibility that night. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside my window, sent a jolt of fear through me. I kept imagining the shadowy figure from the stream lurking just beyond my bedroom door, waiting for me to let my guard down. The whispered invitation, come, echoed in the darkness of my apartment, a constant, insidious suggestion. The next day was a blur of anxiety and paranoia. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every reflection in a window, every shadow in the periphery of my vision, seemed to hold a malevolent gaze. I jumped at the slightest sound, my nerves frayed and raw. I tried to convince myself that it had all been a nightmare, a vivid hallucination brought on by stress and too much late-night research. But the clarity of the images, the chilling specificity of the whispers, made it impossible to completely dismiss. I knew what I had seen, what I had heard, and it had been real. I considered telling someone, my roommate, a friend, even my professor. But the thought of trying to explain it, of seeing the disbelief in their eyes, held me back. How could I possibly articulate the terror of a live stream on the dark web that showed images from inside my own apartment and whispered my name? They would think I was crazy. So, I suffered in silence, haunted by the memories of the whispering static stream. I avoided my laptop, afraid of what I might find if I dared to venture back into the dark web. But the fear lingered, a constant companion in the quiet moments of my day. As the days turned into weeks, the initial shock began to fade, replaced by a dull, persistent unease. I tried to return to my normal routine, to focus on my college work and pretend that nothing had happened. But the experience had left an indelible mark on my psyche. I found myself constantly checking the locks on my doors and windows, peering out into the hallway before opening my apartment door. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the walls of my once safe sanctuary had become thin and permeable. The whispers started to return, subtly at first. I would hear my name called in the quiet of my apartment, a faint, breathy murmur that seemed to come from nowhere. Sometimes I would catch snippets of conversations, just on the edge of hearing the same fragmented phrases I had heard on the stream. I would whirl around, searching for the source, but I was always alone. Then came the shadows. I would see them out of the corner of my eye, fleeting movements in the periphery of my vision, dark shapes that seemed to melt away when I turned to look directly at them. They were like half-formed nightmares bleeding into reality, a constant reminder of the shadowy figure from the stream. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night to a chilling sound. It was the faint hiss of static, seemingly coming from inside my own bedroom. I sat bolt upright in bed, my heart pounding in my chest, straining my ears to pinpoint the source. The hiss was faint but unmistakable, a ghostly echo of the cursed live stream. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight and scanning the room. There was nothing there, but the hissing persisted. A low, insidious drone that seemed to vibrate in the very air around me. It eventually faded away, leaving me shaken and terrified. I knew I couldn't ignore this anymore. Something was happening. Something that went beyond a simple online scare. The whispering static stream had somehow followed me out of the digital realm and into my real life. Against my better judgment, I decided to do some more research. I couldn't bring myself to go back to the dark web, but I scoured the internet for any mention of the whispering static stream. I searched forums, message boards, even obscure corners of Reddit, hoping to find someone else who had encountered it. I found a few fleeting mentions scattered across different sites, always vague and often dismissed as trolls or attention seekers. But there was a consistent thread in some of the accounts: the feeling of being watched, the whispers in real life, the appearance of shadows. It seemed I wasn't the only one who had experienced these unsettling phenomena after encountering the stream. One particularly disturbing post on a long, forgotten forum described a user who claimed to have seen the shadowy figure from the stream in their own home. They wrote about waking up in the middle of the night to find a tall, dark figure standing at the foot of their bed, its features obscured by shadow. The post ended abruptly with no further updates. The more I researched, the more convinced I became that I had stumbled upon something truly dangerous, something that wasn't just a hoax or a piece of internet folklore. The whispering static stream felt like a doorway, a portal to something dark and malevolent that had somehow reached out and touched me. The whispers became more frequent, more insistent. They weren't just my name anymore. They were fragments of sentences, taunting questions, chilling laughter. Sometimes they seemed to come from right behind me, a breathy murmur in my ear. Other times, they echoed from the empty corners of my apartment. The shadows also became more pronounced. I started seeing them during the day, not just in the periphery of my vision, but solid, dark shapes that would appear and disappear in an instant. I even started to catch glimpses of the shadowy figure from the stream, lurking in the doorways of my apartment, just out of sight. One evening, I was sitting on my couch, trying to watch a movie to distract myself, when I heard a clear whisper right next to my ear. "Come closer, Lisa." I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. I slowly turned my head, but there was no one there. The whisper had been so real, so close, that I could have sworn someone was standing right beside me. That was the last straw. I couldn't stay in my apartment anymore. I felt like I was being surrounded, consumed by this unseen entity. I packed a bag, grabbed my keys and my phone, and fled. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to get away. I spent the next few nights sleeping on friends' couches, too terrified to return to my apartment. But the whispers and the shadows followed me. My friends started to look at me with concern, noticing my increasing paranoia and anxiety. I tried to explain what was happening, but the words sounded ridiculous even to my own ears. Eventually, I ran out of places to stay. I had to go back to my apartment. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone there. The last thing I remember clearly was being in my bedroom. The door slightly ajar. I heard the faint hiss of static and then a whisper closer than ever before. "You should have come when I asked, Lisa." I turned towards the doorway. And there it was, the shadowy figure, no longer just a fleeting glimpse, but a solid, menacing presence filling the frame. Its features were still obscured by shadow, but I could feel its gaze, cold and hungry, fixed on me. Then, everything went black. I don't know what happened after that. Maybe I fainted. Maybe something else happened. I haven't been back to my apartment since. I'm writing this from a cheap motel room on the outskirts of the city, constantly looking over my shoulder, listening for the whispers, watching for the shadows. I don't know what the whispering static stream was, or what it wanted from me. But I know it's still out there, lurking in the darkness of the internet, waiting for someone else to stumble upon its cursed link. And I have a terrifying feeling that it hasn't finished with me yet. The whispers are getting louder, and the shadows are getting closer. I can hear it now, a faint, breathy murmur right behind me. Are you still watching, Lisa? I don't dare to turn around. I can only keep writing, hoping that somehow someone will read this and understand what happened to me. Maybe it will serve as a warning, a reminder that there are things on the internet, in the hidden corners of the digital world, that are best left undisturbed. Some legends are more than just stories. Some legends are real, and sometimes they come looking for you. The hissing is getting louder now. I think it's time for me to go. I can see a shadow moving under the door. The whispering is right behind me. Come. My name is David Miller, and up until a few weeks ago I considered myself a fairly ordinary guy. I worked a mundane 9-to-5 job in IT support, fixing other people's computer problems while secretly dreaming of something more exciting. My evenings were usually spent gaming, catching up on the latest tech news, or maybe grabbing a beer with friends. I wasn't particularly adventurous, nor was I one to court danger. In fact, I preferred the predictable comfort of my routine. That was before I stumbled down the rabbit hole of the dark web. It started innocently enough. I was researching cryptocurrency, a topic that had been increasingly capturing my attention. The idea of decentralized digital currency, free from the control of traditional banks, was fascinating. I spent hours reading articles, watching videos, and trying to wrap my head around concepts like blockchain and mining. Somewhere along the line, my search queries took a darker turn. Curiosity, that relentless human trait, led me to explore the less savory corners of the internet. I had always been aware of the dark web's existence, the shadowy underbelly of the internet where illicit activities supposedly thrived. It was the stuff of urban legends and sensationalized news reports. I never imagined I would actually venture there myself, but the allure of the unknown, coupled with the promise of untold secrets and forbidden knowledge, proved too strong to resist. Navigating the dark web was a strange and unsettling experience. The anonymity, the cryptic language, the constant warnings about potential scams and malware all created an atmosphere of paranoia and intrigue. It felt like stepping into a different world, a digital frontier where the rules of the surface web didn't apply. It was on one of these obscure forums, hidden behind layers of encryption and onion routing, that I first encountered the cryptocurrency discussions that would ultimately change everything. The forum was dedicated to all things crypto, but it had a distinctly underground vibe. People talked about obscure coins, risky investments, and, most intriguingly, about mining and hidden wallets on the dark web itself. The conversations were cryptic and often filled with jargon I didn't fully understand, but there was an undeniable air of excitement and secrecy. Users with anonymous handles boasted about their massive profits from mining obscure cryptocurrencies or uncovering forgotten wallets containing vast fortunes. It sounded too good to be true, of course, but the sheer volume of posts and the seemingly genuine enthusiasm of the participants started to chip away at my skepticism. One particular thread caught my eye. It was titled something like "Deep Dive Cryptos Unlocking Hidden Potential." The original poster, who went by the handle Shadow Miner, claimed to have discovered a method for mining Bitcoin on the dark web that was far more efficient and profitable than traditional methods. He provided detailed instructions, links to specific software, and even offered to help newcomers get started. Now I'm not a complete idiot. I knew the dark web was rife with scams, and the promise of easy riches should have set off alarm bells in my head. But there was something about Shadow Miner's posts that felt different. He seemed knowledgeable, his instructions were detailed, and other users in the thread vouched for his legitimacy. Perhaps it was the thrill of the forbidden, or maybe I was just desperate for a way to escape the monotony of my life. But I decided to take a leap of faith. I downloaded the software Shadow Miner recommended, a seemingly innocuous program that he claimed would optimize my computer's processing power for mining. I followed his instructions meticulously, carefully navigating the unfamiliar interface and inputting the cryptic commands he provided. It felt like I was participating in some kind of clandestine operation, a secret world hidden from the prying eyes of the mainstream internet. To my surprise, it actually worked. After a few hours of letting the software run in the background, I checked the digital wallet address Shadow Miner had provided, and there it was, a small fraction of a Bitcoin. It wasn't much, maybe the equivalent of $20 or $30 at the time, but the feeling of accomplishment was immense. I had actually done it. I had tapped into this hidden world of dark web cryptocurrency and come out with a tangible reward. I excitedly posted in the forum, thanking Shadow Miner for his guidance and sharing my success. He replied with a brief message congratulating me and suggesting I continue mining to accumulate more Bitcoin. Other users also chimed in with words of encouragement, making me feel like I was part of some exclusive club. For the next few days, I continued to run the mining software whenever my computer was idle. The small trickle of Bitcoin continued, slowly but steadily increasing my digital balance. I started to imagine the possibilities, maybe could eventually earn enough to quit my job, travel the world, or invest in something truly meaningful. The dark web, once a source of fear and apprehension, was starting to feel like a land of opportunity. But then things started to get weird. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly. One evening, as I was browsing the internet, I noticed the small green light next to my webcam flicker on for a brief second. Even though I hadn't initiated any video calls or applications, I dismissed it as a glitch, a momentary software malfunction. These things happen, especially with older computers like mine. However, the flickering continued. It would happen at random times, day or night, sometimes just a single flash, other times a series of rapid blinks. It was unnerving, to say the least. I started covering my webcam with a piece of tape when I wasn't using it, a habit I had picked up from reading online articles about privacy concerns. But even with the tape in place, the occasional flicker of the green light sent a shiver down my spine. Then came the files. I was organizing some documents on my hard drive when I stumbled upon a folder I didn't recognize. It was labeled with a string of random characters and contained several files with equally cryptic names. I cautiously opened one of them, and it appeared to be a log file, filled with lines of code and seemingly random data. I tried opening a few other files, but they were all similarly indecipherable. I racked my brain trying to remember if I had ever created this folder or downloaded these files. I was usually quite meticulous about organizing my computer, and I had no recollection of anything like this. I ran a virus scan, but it came back clean. I even tried searching online for the folder name and file names, but nothing came up. It was as if they had materialized out of thin air. The combination of the flickering webcam and the mysterious files started to make me feel uneasy. A nagging feeling in the back of my mind told me that these strange occurrences were somehow connected to my foray into the dark web and the cryptocurrency mining I had been doing. I started to wonder if Shadow Miner's software was more than just a simple mining program. Could it have installed something else on my computer? Something that was now causing these bizarre events? Paranoia began to creep in. I started to feel like I was being watched, like someone was lurking in the shadows of my digital world. Every notification, every unexpected pop-up, every slight slowdown of my computer sent a jolt of anxiety through me. I found myself constantly checking my webcam, even though covered with tape. I obsessively scanned my hard drive for any new or unfamiliar files. Sleep became a luxury. I would lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with unanswered questions and growing fears. The flickering webcam light, even in my memory, seemed to mock me from the darkness. The cryptic file names danced in my thoughts, hinting at some unknown and potentially sinister purpose. The thrill of easy Bitcoin had long since faded, replaced by a gnawing sense of dread. I had ventured into a world I didn't understand, and now it seemed like that world was starting to seep into mine. I had a bad feeling about this, a feeling that this was just the beginning of something much darker and more terrifying than I could ever have imagined. The small amount of Bitcoin I had acquired suddenly felt like a cursed treasure, a digital Trojan horse that had brought something unwanted and malevolent into my life, and I had no idea how to get rid of it. The strange occurrences didn't stop with the flickering webcam and the cryptic files. In fact, they seemed to escalate. The webcam light started flashing more frequently, sometimes multiple times an hour. It was no longer a brief flicker. Sometimes it would stay on for several seconds, as if someone or something was actively using it. Even with the tape securely covering the lens, the sight of that green light illuminating in the darkness sent waves of anxiety through me. I started unplugging my webcam whenever I wasn't using my computer, a small measure of comfort in an increasingly unsettling situation. The unfamiliar files also began to multiply. New folders with random character names would appear in different directories on my hard drive. The files within them remained indecipherable, filled with gibberish and code. I tried deleting them, but they would often reappear a few days later, sometimes with slightly different names or in new locations. It was as if some unseen entity was constantly monitoring my computer, leaving these digital breadcrumbs behind. My initial attempts to rationalize these events as software glitches or random system errors quickly crumbled under the weight of their persistence and increasing strangeness. I knew, deep down, that this was connected to the dark web and the mining software I had installed. The sense of unease I had felt at the end of Part 1 had solidified into a full-blown paranoia that permeated every aspect of my life. I decided to try and investigate the files. I downloaded a hex editor, hoping to decipher their contents. Hours I spent staring at lines of hexadecimal code, trying to find some recognizable pattern or text. It was like trying to read an alien language. Most of the data seemed completely random, but occasionally I would stumble upon short strings of characters that looked like IP addresses or website URLs, all of which led to dead ends when I tried to trace them. I also started monitoring my network activity. I installed a network monitoring tool, hoping to see if my computer was communicating with any unusual or suspicious IP addresses. The results were overwhelming. My computer was constantly exchanging data with countless servers around the world, a normal occurrence for any internet-connected device, but buried within the logs, I noticed some connections to IP addresses that were flagged as potentially malicious or associated with known dark web infrastructure. These connections were often brief and intermittent, but their presence only fueled my growing fear. Desperate for answers, I decided to revisit the cryptocurrency forum where it had all started. I logged in with my anonymous handle and searched for the thread where Shadow Miner had posted his instructions. The thread was still active, but Shadow Miner himself hadn't posted in several days. Other users were asking similar questions to mine, reporting strange activity on their computers after using his software. Some mentioned flickering webcams. Others spoke of unusual files appearing on their hard drives. I decided to post my own experience, detailing the webcam flickering and the mysterious files. I asked if anyone else was experiencing similar issues, and if anyone had any idea what might be going on. The responses I received were a mixed bag. Some users dismissed my concerns as paranoia or suggested my computer might be infected with a virus unrelated to the mining software. Others, however, shared similar stories, confirming that they too had noticed strange things happening after following Shadow Miner's instructions. One user with the handle Ghost in a Machine sent me a private message. He claimed to have been using Shadow Miner's software for a while and had experienced similar issues. He warned me that the software might contain more than just a miner. It could potentially be spyware or some kind of remote access tool. He advised me to disconnect my computer from the internet immediately and run a thorough malware scan. Ghost in T Machine's message sent a fresh wave of panic through me. I immediately unplugged my Ethernet cable, severing my computer's connection to the outside world. I then ran multiple malware scans using different antivirus programs, but all of them came back negative. This was even more unsettling. If it wasn't Walson malware, then what was it? I tried to reach out to Shadow Miner directly, sending him a private message asking for clarification about the strange activity. Days passed, but I received no response. His silence was deafening and only served to deepen my suspicion. I started to feel like I had been deliberately targeted, lured into this trap with the promise of easy money. The isolation started to take its toll. I became increasingly withdrawn, hesitant to talk to my friends or family about what was happening. How could I explain this to them? They would think I was crazy, that I had gotten myself involved in something dangerous and foolish. And they would probably be right. My work performance suffered. I found it hard to concentrate, my mind constantly preoccupied with the strange events unfolding on my computer. I started taking more sick days, unable to face the mundane routine of my job, while this unseen threat loomed over me. One evening, I decided to take a closer look at the mining software itself. I'm not a programmer, but I have a basic understanding of how software works. I downloaded a process monitoring tool and ran the mining program. I watched as it consumed my CPU resources as expected. But I also noticed it establishing numerous network connections, far more than what seemed necessary for simply mining cryptocurrency. One particular connection caught my eye. It was a persistent connection to an IP address located in a country known for its lax cybersecurity laws. The connection remained active even when the mining activity seemed to have subsided. This felt like a smoking gun. It strongly suggested that the software was indeed doing more than just mining Bitcoin. Driven by a desperate need to understand what was happening, I decided to take a risk. I reconnected my computer to the internet, but this time, I used a VPN to mask my IP address. I then used a virtual machine to run the mining software in an isolated environment, hoping to observe its behavior without directly compromising my main system. The virtual machine environment was slow and clunky, but it allowed me to monitor the software's activity more closely. I ran the mining program and watched as it established the same suspicious network connections. I then used a packet sniffer to capture the data being exchanged. The data was mostly encrypted. But after hours of analysis, I managed to identify a few unencrypted packets. These packets contained snippets of information that sent a chill down my spine. There were timestamps, keystrokes, and even screenshots of my desktop. The mining software wasn't just mining cryptocurrency, it was actively monitoring my computer activity and sending the data to a remote server. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been compromised. Someone, presumably Shadowminer or whoever was behind him, had gained access to my computer. They could see everything I was doing. Every website I visited, every email I sent. The flickering webcam suddenly made terrifying sense. They weren't just monitoring me, they were watching me. Panic threatened to overwhelm me. I immediately shut down the virtual machine and disconnected my computer from the internet again. I felt exposed and vulnerable, like my privacy had been completely violated. The thought of someone watching me, knowing my every move, was deeply unsettling. I spent the next few days in a state of constant anxiety, jumping at every sound, afraid to even turn on my computer. I felt like I was living in a digital prison, constantly under surveillance. The once comforting familiarity of my apartment now felt like a cage. Then one evening, something even more disturbing happened. I was sitting on my couch trying to distract myself by watching TV when my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was simply my name, David. My heart pounded in my chest as I cautiously opened the email. The body contained only a single sentence, "We see you, David." The message was chillingly simple, yet it conveyed a profound sense of dread. It was a direct confirmation of my worst fears. They knew who I was, they knew my name, and they were letting me know that they were watching. I looked around my apartment, my eyes darting nervously from window to window. Was someone outside? Was there a hidden camera somewhere in my home? The feeling of being watched intensified, becoming almost unbearable. I didn't know what these people. What did they want? The small amount of Bitcoin I had mined seemed insignificant now. A paltry reward for the violation of my privacy and the fear that now consumed me. I had stumbled into something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined, and I had no idea how to escape. The message on my phone was a clear warning, a chilling reminder that I was no longer in control. I was trapped in their web, and the darkness was closing in. The email sent me into a state of near panic. "We'll see you, David." The simplicity of the message was what made it so terrifying. It wasn't a threat, not explicitly, but it didn't need to be. The implication was clear: they had infiltrated my life, and they were letting me know they were in control. My first instinct was to call the police, but the thought quickly died in my throat. How could I explain this? "Officer, I got involved in a cryptocurrency forum on the dark web, downloaded some suspicious software, and now I think I'm being watched by shadowy figures." It sounded ridiculous, like something out of a bad sci-fi movie. Besides, what could the police even do? Track down an anonymous email sender, investigate a vague claim of being watched. I knew they wouldn't take me seriously. And even if they did, these people on the dark web were likely far beyond their reach. I considered reaching out to Ghost and T-Machine again, the user who had warned me about spyware. But I hesitated. Could I really trust anyone in that shadowy online world? What if he was part of it all along? Paranoia had become my constant companion, whispering doubts and suspicions into my ear. Instead, I decided to take matters into my own hands. My priority was to sever all ties with the dark web and these unknown watchers. I unplugged my computer for good this time, not just the Ethernet cable, but the power cord as well. I felt a strange sense of relief as the humming of the hard drive finally died down. It was as if I was cutting off a parasitic connection. But the fear lingered. They had my name, my email address. What else did they know? My home address, my phone number. The thought of them knowing where I live sent a shiver down my spine. I started looking out my windows more frequently, peering through the blinds, half expecting to see a shadowy figure lurking in the street. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside my window sent my heart racing. I kept imagining someone breaking into my apartment, their faces obscured by the darkness, their intentions unknown but undoubtedly sinister. The next day, I decided I couldn't stay in my apartment. It felt too exposed, too vulnerable. I packed a small bag with some clothes, cash, and my passport. I didn't have a concrete plan, but I knew I needed to get away at least for a while. I booked a cheap motel room in a town a few hours away, hoping that putting some physical distance between myself and my apartment would offer some respite from the fear. The drive was tense. I kept checking my rearview mirror, convinced that I was being followed. Every car that stayed behind me for too long sent a jolt of anxiety through me. I felt like a fugitive, constantly looking over my shoulder. The motel was dingy and depressing, but it felt like a temporary sanctuary. I spent the day huddled in my room, the curtains drawn, trying to make sense of what had happened. I replayed the events in my mind, searching for clues for any sign I might have missed. That evening, my phone buzzed again. It was another email from the same unknown address. This time, the subject line was different. Room 204. My blood ran cold. They knew where I was. The realization was like a physical blow. There was no escape. They were still watching, still tracking my every move. How was this possible? Had they hacked my phone? Were they monitoring my online activity even when I wasn't using my computer? The email contained no other text, just that single, chilling question. But it spoke volumes. It told me that they were always one step ahead, that my attempts to escape were futile. I was trapped in their game, and they were enjoying every minute of it. Panic began to set in again, but this time it was mixed with a sense of resignation. What was the point of running? They would just find me again. It felt like I was caught in a nightmare, a terrifying loop with no end in sight. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. My heart leaped into my throat. I froze, barely daring to breathe. Who could it be? The motel staff, or someone else? Someone who knew I was here. The knocking came again, louder this time. I crept towards the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the peephole. But it was covered from the outside. My breath hitched in my chest. This was it. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. I had to get out of here. I looked around the small room, desperately searching for another exit. The only other way out was the window, which looked out onto the motel parking lot. It was a long drop, but it was better than facing whatever was behind that door. I threw open the window and climbed out, landing awkwardly on the gravel below. Pain shot up my ankle, but I ignored it, scrambling to my feet and running towards the darkness at the edge of the parking lot. I didn't stop running until I reached the highway. I kept going, my lungs burning, my legs aching. The image of that covered peephole burned into my mind. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to keep moving, to put as much distance as possible between myself and that motel room. Hours later, exhausted and disoriented, I found myself in a small, unfamiliar town. I was running on fumes, both physically and mentally. I knew I couldn't keep this up forever. I needed help, but I was terrified to trust anyone. I eventually found a small, out-of-the-way internet cafe. Despite my fear, I knew I had to try and understand what was happening. I used a public computer, careful not to log into any of my personal accounts. I searched for information about Shadow Miner, about the cryptocurrency forum, about anything that might shed some light on my situation. What I found was disturbing. There were other reports, scattered across various forums and message boards, of people experiencing similar issues after using dark web mining software. Flickering webcams, strange files, even reports of identity theft and financial fraud. It seemed like Shadowminer was part of a larger operation, a sophisticated network that preyed on unsuspecting individuals lured by the promise of easy money. Some of the posts were years old, suggesting that this had been going on for a long time. And there were whispers, just whispers, of something even darker, something more sinister than just stealing data or mining cryptocurrency. Some users claimed that those who dug too deep, who tried to expose the operation, had simply disappeared. As I read these chilling accounts, a cold dread washed over me. I realized that I had stumbled into something much bigger and more dangerous than I could ever imagined. This wasn't just about some shady software. It was about a network of individuals operating in the shadows, with unknown motives and potentially deadly consequences. I knew I couldn't go back to my old life. My apartment was compromised, my identity potentially at risk. I had become a target, and I had no idea why. Was it just because I had downloaded their software? Had I stumbled upon something I wasn't supposed to see? As I sat there in the dimly lit internet cafe, the weight of my situation pressing down on me, I noticed a new email notification pop up on the screen. It was from the same unknown address. My heart sank. The subject line this time was even more chilling. We know what you're reading. I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. They were watching me even here, in this anonymous internet cafe. There was no escape. They were everywhere. I slammed the laptop shut, a wave of pure terror washing over me. I had to get out of here, to disappear, to become someone else. But even as the thought crossed my mind, a sense of utter hopelessness settled in. They would find me. They would always find me. I stood up, my legs shaky, and walked out of the internet cafe and into the night. The streets were dark and deserted, and every shadow seemed to hold a potential threat. I kept walking aimlessly, the chilling words echoing in my mind. We know what you're reading. I don't know what the future holds for me. I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, afraid of every COD, every unexpected phone call, every new email. I've become a ghost in my own life, constantly running, constantly hiding. My foray into the dark web for the promise of easy Bitcoin has cost me everything. My peace of mind, my sense of security, my very identity. And I have a terrifying feeling that this is only the beginning. They're still out there watching, waiting. And I know, with a chilling certainty, that they will eventually find me again. The darkness has followed me out of the digital realm and into the real world. And I don't know if I'll ever truly escape it. My name is Emily Carter, and for the past few years, my life felt like a runaway train. I was stuck in a dead-end job as a data analyst, sifting through endless spreadsheets that blurred together into a monotonous gray. My apartment, a cramped studio in a noisy part of the city, felt more like a cage than a sanctuary. Every day was a relentless cycle of wake up, work, eat, maybe watch some mindless television and sleep, only to repeat it all again. The vibrant, adventurous spirit I once possessed felt like it had been slowly suffocated by the weight of routine and obligation. It wasn't a dramatic, single event that pushed me to the edge. It was the accumulation of 1,000 tiny frustrations, the feeling of being constantly watched and tracked in this hyper-connected world, the gnawing sense that I was living a life that wasn't truly mine. Social media, with its curated highlight reels of everyone else's seemingly perfect existence, only amplified my feelings of inadequacy and longing for something more authentic. I craved anonymity, a chance to disconnect from the digital noise and reconnect with myself, or at least figure out who that self even was anymore. The idea of simply packing up and disappearing had been a recurring fantasy for months. I'd spend my lunch breaks scrolling through articles about off-grid living, dreaming of a small cabin in the woods or a quiet life by the sea. But the reality of such a drastic change felt daunting, almost impossible. I had responsibilities, albeit ones I increasingly resented. There was my aging mother to consider, even though our relationship was strained. There were bills to pay, even though the work felt soul-crushing. The logistics of completely vanishing seemed insurmountable. Then, one night, while deep down a rabbit hole of online forums dedicated to privacy and digital security, I stumbled upon a thread discussing ways to temporarily get off the grid. The conversation was cryptic, filled with jargon I didn't fully understand, but one phrase kept popping up: ghost addresses. Intrigued, I clicked on a link that led me to a corner that I never knew existed: the dark web. My initial foray into the dark web was a mixture of fear and fascination. Navigating through the layers of encryption and hidden services felt like stepping into a clandestine world, a place where the normal rules didn't apply. The sheer volume of illicit activities being advertised was overwhelming and frankly quite disturbing. I saw marketplaces for drugs, weapons, stolen data, and all sorts of things I couldn't even begin to comprehend. It was a stark reminder of the darker aspects of human nature, a hidden underbelly of society that most people never encounter. But amidst the illegal and unsettling content, I also found discussions about privacy and anonymity. People shared tips on using VPNs, encrypting communications, and masking their digital footprints. It was in one of these forums that I saw more detailed mentions of ghost addresses and burner phones as tools for achieving temporary anonymity. The idea resonated with me. It wasn't about engaging in anything illegal. It was about creating a temporary shield, a way to step outside the boundaries of my normal life without completely severing all ties. The concept of a ghost address was explained as a physical location that wasn't tied to any real identity. It was essentially a mail drop, a place where you could receive correspondence without revealing your actual home address. Some users described using them for short-term stays, while others used them for receiving packages anonymously. The appeal was obvious. It offered a degree of separation from the digital world and the prying eyes of corporations and governments. The burner phone was a more straightforward concept: a cheap, prepaid mobile phone that could be used for a limited time and then discarded, leaving no trace back to the user. It was a classic tool for maintaining anonymity, and the dark web marketplaces were filled with vendors offering various models, some even pre-configured with extra security features. After days of research and careful consideration, I decided to take the plunge. The allure of escaping, even for a little while, was too strong to resist. I found a vendor on one of the more reputable marketplaces, or at least as reputable as a dark web vendor could be, that offered both ghost addresses and burner phones. The process of purchasing them was surprisingly simple, albeit a little nerve-wracking. I had to use cryptocurrency, which I had to learn how to acquire, adding another layer of unfamiliarity to the whole experience. The listing for the ghost address was vague, providing only a general location within a rural area a few hours away from the city. It promised a physical address where I could receive mail and even stay for a short period if needed. The burner phone was a basic model, unlocked and ready to use. The vendor assured anonymity and discretion, which, given the context, was probably the least they could do. A few days later, the burner phone arrived in the mail, packaged in a plain, unmarked box. It was a generic no-frills device, exactly as advertised. I inserted the prepaid SIM card and turned it on. It worked perfectly. Ghost address. Information arrived via an encrypted message through the dark web marketplace. It was a set of coordinates and a brief description of the location: vacant lot, County Road 17. Approximately 10 miles west of the town of Havenwood. Look for a weathered oak tree at the edge of the property. The description was sparse, but it was enough to give me a general idea of where to go. Havenwood was a small, rural town I had never heard of before, nestled in a sparsely populated part of the state. It sounded remote and isolated, which was exactly what I was looking for. The following weekend, I decided to take a drive to the ghost address. I told my mother I was going on a short hiking trip to avoid any unnecessary questions. I packed a small bag with essentials, grabbed the burner phone, and set off. The drive was longer than I anticipated, taking me through winding country roads with vast stretches of farmland and dense forests. As I got closer to Havenwood, the scenery became increasingly desolate. Houses were few and far between, and the air felt heavy with an almost palpable sense of isolation. Following the directions, I eventually found County Road 17. It was a narrow, unpaved road that seemed to lead to nowhere. I drove slowly, scanning the sides of the road for the weathered oak tree mentioned in the description. After a few miles, I spotted a large, ancient oak standing alone at the edge of an overgrown field. I pulled my car onto the shoulder of the road and got out. The air was still and quiet, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. The vacant lot was exactly as described: an empty, rectangular plot of land, overgrown with weeds and tall grass. There was no house, no building, not even a mailbox. It was just an empty field. A wave of disappointment washed over me. Had I been scammed? Was this some kind of elaborate joke? I pulled out the encrypted message on the burner phone and reread the description. Vacant lot, County Road 17, weathered oak tree. It matched perfectly. Confused and slightly irritated, I decided to walk onto the property to get a better look. The ground was uneven and covered with patches of dry, cracked earth. As I made my way towards the center of the lot, something caught my eye. It was a patch of disturbed earth, a rectangle of darker soil that stood out against the lighter, parched ground around it. Curiosity overriding my initial annoyance, I walked closer. As I got within a few feet, my blood ran cold. It was a grave, a single freshly dug grave. The soil was loose and mounded, and there were no markings of any kind. No headstone, no flowers. Nothing to indicate who might be buried there. A knot of fear tightened in my stomach. This wasn't just a vacant lot. This was something else entirely. What had I stumbled upon? And what did this have to do with the ghost address I had purchased on the dark web? The isolation of the location, the unmarked grave, it all sent a shiver of unease down my spine. My desire to get off the grid had led me to a place that felt profoundly wrong. A place where dark secrets seemed to be buried beneath the surface. I suddenly had a very bad feeling about this whole thing. This was far from the escape I had envisioned. This felt like the beginning of something much more sinister. The sight of the freshly dug grave sent a jolt of pure terror through me. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Was this some kind of sick joke? Had the dark web vendor deliberately sent me to this desolate place to scare me? Or was there something far more sinister at play? The air, which had moments ago felt merely still, now seemed heavy with an oppressive silence, amplifying the frantic beating of my heart. I cautiously circled the grave, my eyes scanning the surrounding area for any clues. The ground around it was undisturbed except for the loose soil piled on top. There were no footprints other than my own leading up to it. No tools, no discarded items, nothing to indicate who had been here or why. It was as if the grave had simply appeared in the middle of this forgotten field. A wave of nausea washed over me. The thought of someone lying beneath that mound of earth, alone and unmarked, was deeply unsettling. Had they died naturally, or was this the result of something far more violent? The isolation of the location made the latter seem more plausible, and the idea sent a fresh wave of fear coursing through my veins. I pulled out the burner phone, my hands trembling slightly. Should I call the police? The thought flickered through my mind, but I immediately dismissed it. How would I explain being here? What would I say about buying a ghost address on the dark web? The whole situation felt so bizarre and potentially illegal that involving the authorities seemed like a recipe for even more trouble. Besides, a part of me, a morbidly curious and perhaps foolish part, wanted to know more. This wasn't just a random vacant lot, it was a mystery, a dark puzzle that had somehow landed in my lap. My initial desire for anonymity had led me to this unsettling discovery. And now I felt compelled to unravel it, even if it meant venturing into dangerous territory. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the field. The air was getting colder, and a sense of urgency began to creep in. I couldn't stay here all night. I needed to figure out what to do next. I decided to try and find any signs of recent activity. I widened my search, carefully examining the perimeter of the vacant lot. The fence line was mostly broken down, with sections of rusty wire lying tangled in the weeds. Beyond the lot, the landscape was a mix of overgrown fields and dense woodland. There were no houses or buildings visible in any direction. As I walked along the edge of the property, I noticed something glinting in the fading light. It was partially hidden beneath a clump of tall grass. I bent down and pulled it out. It was a small, plastic zip tie, the kind that are often used as restraints. My stomach lurched. This was not a good sign. I continued my search, my senses on high alert. A few feet away, I found another zip tie, this one broken, and then another. My heart pounded in my chest. These weren't just random pieces of trash. They suggested that someone had been restrained here, possibly recently. The implications were terrifying. Was the person buried in that grave a victim of violence? Had I stumbled upon a crime scene? The thought sent a shiver of dread down my spine. I was alone, miles from anywhere, in a place that felt heavy with unspoken horrors. I considered getting back in my car and driving away, forgetting I had ever come here. But the image of that unmarked grave haunted me. I couldn't just leave, not knowing what had happened. I felt a strange sense of responsibility, a morbid curiosity that wouldn't let me turn away. I decided to use the burner phone to try and find out more about the location. I opened a browser and searched for County Road 17 Havenwood. The results were sparse. Havenwood appeared to be a very small, rural town with a population of just a few hundred people. There was a brief mention of a local newspaper, the Havenwood Herald, but no online presence. I tried searching for news articles related to Havenwood, hoping to find something about a missing person or an unsolved crime. But the search results were mostly about local events and community news. There was nothing to suggest anything untoward had happened recently. Frustrated, I decided to try a different approach. I navigated back to the dark web marketplace, where I had purchased the ghost address. I found the vendor's profile and looked for any contact information. There was an option to send a message through the platform. Hesitantly, I typed out a message. I visit the address I purchased, and I found a grave on the property. Can you provide any information? I knew it was a long shot, but I didn't know what else to do. I sent the message and then turned off the phone, feeling a strange mix of hope and dread. As darkness fully descended, the vacant lot took on an even more sinister atmosphere. The shadows seemed to twist and wreathe, and every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. I knew I couldn't stay here. It was too exposed, too vulnerable. I walked back to my car, my mind racing. I needed to find a place to stay for the night, somewhere I could process what I had found and decide what to do next. Havenwood was the closest town, so I decided to head there. The drive to Havenwood was unsettling. The roads were dark and winding, and I felt like I was being watched from the shadows of the trees. The few houses I passed were dimly lit and appeared deserted. The whole area had an eerie, forgotten feel. When I finally reached the town limits, Havenwood looked exactly as I had imagined: small, quiet, and slightly run down. The main street consisted of a few closed shops, a gas station, and a small diner with a flickering neon sign. There was a single motel on the outskirts of town, its sign proclaiming vacancy in faded letters. I pulled into the mall parking lot and parked my car. The place looked deserted. I hesitated for a moment, feeling a strong urge to just keep driving, to put as much distance as possible between myself and that grave. But I knew I needed to rest and think. I went inside the motel office, which was dimly lit and smelled faintly of stale cigarette smoke. A man with tired eyes and a wary expression sat behind the counter, reading a newspaper. He looked up as I entered. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice flat. "Yes, I'd like a room for the night," I said, trying to sound casual. He nodded and slid a registration form across the counter. As I filled it out, I glanced around the office. There was a notice board covered with local flyers and a faded map of the area. My eyes scanned the map, trying to locate County Road 17. It was marked as a small, unpaved road to the west of town. After checking in, I went to my room. It was basic but clean, with a double bed, a small television, and a window overlooking the parking lot. I locked the door behind me and sat down on the edge of the bed, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over me. I pulled out the burner phone again, half expecting a reply from the dark web vendor. But there was nothing. I felt a surge of frustration and a growing sense of unease. I was alone in a strange town, with the knowledge of an unmarked grave in the middle of nowhere, and no idea what to do next. Sleep didn't come easily. My mind was filled with disturbing images: the freshly dug soil, the plastic zip ties, the desolate landscape. Every creak and groan of the old motel seemed to amplify my anxiety. I kept thinking about the person buried in that grave. Who were they? How did they end up there? And was I in some kind of danger? Sometime in the early hours of the morning, I finally drifted off to sleep, only to be plagued by nightmares. I dreamt of being chased through dark fields, the sound of digging echoing in my ears. I woke up feeling groggy and disoriented, the lingering sense of dread still clinging to me. I knew I couldn't just stay in the motel room all day. I needed to do something. I decided to go into town and see if I could find out anything about County Road 17 or the vacant lot. Maybe someone in Havenwood knew something. After a quick shower, I went to the diner on Main Street. It was the only place in town that seemed to be open. A few locals were sitting at the counter, nursing cups of coffee and chatting quietly. I sat down at a booth and ordered breakfast. As I waited for my food, I listened to the conversations around me. The talk was mostly about local gossip and the weather. There was no mention of anything unusual or disturbing. When the waitress came to take my plate away, I decided to take a chance. "Excuse me," I said, trying to sound like a tourist. "I was wondering if you could help me. I'm trying to find a place called County Road 17. Do you know where that is?" The waitress, a middle-aged woman with a friendly smile, nodded. "Sure, honey. County Road 17 is about 10 miles west of town. It's mostly just farmland out that way. Why are you looking for it?" "Oh, I'm just exploring the area," I said vaguely. I heard it was a scenic drive. She raised an eyebrow slightly but didn't press further. "Well, there's not much to see out there, just fields and woods. Be careful, though. Some of those back roads can be a little rough. Thanks for the tip. Do you know if anyone lives out that way? Maybe near a vacant lot with a big oak tree?" The waitress frowned, her brow furrowing. A vacant lot with an oak tree. There was that old Miller place out on County Road 17. Been vacant for years. Had a big oak tree in the front yard, I think. But that was a while ago. I don't know if it's still standing. "The Miller place?" I asked, my interest piqued. "Do you know anything about it?" The waitress hesitated for a moment, a shadow passing over her face. "Not much. The Millers moved away a long time ago. There were some rumors, nothing good. But that was years ago. Folks around here don't talk about it much anymore." "Rumors? Nothing good." My heart skipped a beat. Could this be connected to the grave I found? I had to find out more. "Do you know anyone who might remember the Miller place?" I asked. The waitress thought for a moment. "Maybe old Mr. Henderson down at the hardware store. He's lived here his whole life. He might know something." I thanked her for her help and finished my coffee. I knew where I had to go next. The hardware store. Maybe old Mr. Henderson held the key to the dark secret I had stumbled upon on County Road 17. The sense of dread hadn't lessened, but now it was mixed with a sliver of grim determination. I had come this far, I wasn't gonna back down now. The Havenwood hardware store was a dimly lit, cluttered space filled with the scent of sawdust and oil. Tools hung from the walls, and shelves overflowed with nuts, bolts, and various other odds and ends. Behind the counter, an elderly man with a weathered face and kind eyes was helping a customer find a specific type of nail. This had to be Mr. Henderson. I waited patiently until the customer had left, then approached the counter. "Excuse me, Mr. Henderson," I asked hesitantly. The old man looked up, his gaze steady and inquisitive. "That's me. What can I do for you, young lady?" "I'm just passing through town," I began, trying to sound casual, "and I was wondering if you knew anything about a place called County Road 17. Specifically, a vacant lot that used to be the old Miller place." A flicker of something, perhaps recognition, perhaps unease, crossed Mr. Henderson's face. He leaned slightly closer, his voice dropping a notch. "The Miller place, you say? Out past the old Blackwood farm?" "That sounds right," I replied, my heart pounding with anticipation. "I was just curious about the history of the area." Mr. Henderson sighed, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "The Miller place, that's a sad story. They were a nice family, the Millers. Lived there for years. But then, well, then things change." He paused, as if reluctant to continue. I pressed gently, "What happened?" He looked around the empty store before speaking again, his voice low. "Their daughter, Sarah, she went missing one day. Vanished without a trace. It was a long time ago, back in the late 70s, maybe early 80s. The police searched, the whole town searched, but they never found her." A chill ran down my spine. A missing girl. Could this be connected to the grave? "What about the parents?" I asked. "Did they ever find out what happened to her?" Mr. Henderson shook his head sadly. "No. They were never the same after that. The father, Thomas, he became a recluse, barely left the house. Martha, his wife, she eventually passed away, heartbroken. Thomas stayed on for a few more years. Then he just up and left one day. Never saw him again." "So the house has been vacant ever since?" I asked. "The house burned down a few years after Thomas left. Mr. Henderson said, his gaze distant. Arson, the police said, though they never caught who did it. The property's been empty ever since. Just the land and that old oak tree. The old oak tree. The one mentioned in the dark web listing. It all seemed to be fitting together, but the pieces were dark and disturbing. Did they ever suspect what happened to Sarah? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mr. Henderson hesitated again, looking troubled. There were rumors, of course. Small towns are like that. Some folks whispered that she ran away. Others thought something darker happened. There was a fella who used to hang around the Miller's place, a real shady character. Some people thought he might have been involved, but there was never any proof. A shady character. Unmarked zip ties. A fresh grave on the property. The pieces were falling into place, painting a grim picture. Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice trembling slightly. I actually went out to the old Miller place yesterday. To the vacant lot. His eyes widened with concern. You went out there. Why? I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. I was looking for something. And I found something disturbing. He leaned forward, his expression serious. What did you find? I found a grave, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. A fresh grave. Unmarked, Mr. Henderson's face paled. He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes filled with a mixture of shock and fear. A grave? Out at the Miller place? Are you sure? Yes, I said, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. It looked like it had been dug recently. The old man ran a hand over his face, his brow furrowed in thought. This is terrible. After all these years, Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice urgent. Do you think this could connect it to Sarah Miller's disappearance? He looked at me, his eyes filled with a profound sadness. It's possible, anything's possible after all this time. But who would bury someone there now? And why keep it a secret? I didn't have an answer. The whole situation was shrouded in mystery and dread. But I knew I couldn't ignore what I had found. Mr. Henderson, I said, making a decision. I think the police need to know about this. He nodded slowly. You're right. This can't be ignored. But be careful, young lady. If something happened out there, whoever did it might still be around. His warning sent a fresh wave of fear through me. But I knew he was right. I had stumbled upon something dark and potentially dangerous, and I couldn't just walk away. I thanked Mr. Henderson for his help and left the hardware store. My mind was racing. I needed to contact the authorities, but I was still hesitant to reveal how I had found the location. The dark web purchase felt like a complication I didn't need. As I walked back towards the motel, I noticed a small, unassuming building across the street with a sign that read, Havenwood Sheriff's Department. I took a deep breath and crossed the street. Inside, a stern-looking woman with a badge sat behind a desk, talking on the phone. She looked up as I entered and gestured for me to wait. After a few minutes, she hung up and looked at me expectantly. Can I help you? She asked, her voice official. Yes, ma'am, I said. My name is Emily Carter. And I've found something I think you need to know about. I proceeded to tell her about finding the grave. Vacant lot on County Road 17. Careful to omit the details about the dark web and the ghost address. I simply said I had been exploring the area and stumbled upon it. The sheriff's deputy listened intently, her expression growing more serious as I spoke. When I finished, she asked me several questions about the location and the condition of the grave. We'll send someone out there to take a look, she said. Can you show us exactly where it is? I agreed to take them to the location. A few hours later, I found myself back on County Road 17, this time with 2 sheriff's deputies in a patrol car. The sun was high in the sky, casting a less menacing light on the landscape, but the sense of unease was still palpable. I directed them to the vacant lot and pointed out the fresh grave. The deputies examined it carefully, taking photographs and measurements. One of them used a shovel to carefully remove some of the loose soil. After a few minutes of digging, they uncovered something that made them both exchange grim glances. It was a piece of fabric, dark and stained. They continued digging, and soon, the outline of something larger began to emerge from the earth. My heart pounded in my chest. A knot of dread tightening in my stomach. It wasn't long before they had unearthed enough to confirm my worst fears. It was a body wrapped in a dark sheet. The deputies immediately called for backup, and soon the vacant lot was swarming with law enforcement officers. They cordoned off the area and began the grim task of exhuming the body and collecting evidence. I stood nearby, watching the scene unfold, a sense of shock and horror washing over me. I had come to Havenwood seeking anonymity, a way to escape the pressures of my life. Instead, I had stumbled upon a dark secret, a hidden tragedy that had been buried for years. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the field, the medical examiner arrived. The body was carefully removed and taken away. The deputies told me they would need to ask me more questions and might need me to stay in town for a few days. Sitting in the Havenwood Sheriff's Department later that evening, I felt a strange mix of fear and a grim sense of satisfaction. I had done the right thing by reporting the grave, even if it meant my own desire for anonymity had been shattered. The deputy who had taken my initial report came to speak with me, Ms. Carter. She said, her expression serious. "We have examined the body. It's been buried for quite some time, possibly decades. We also found some items with the body, including a faded photograph of a young woman." She showed me the photograph. It was a picture of a girl with bright eyes and a hopeful smile. Something about her face seemed familiar. "Do you recognize her?" the deputy asked. I looked at the photograph again, my mind racing, and then it hit me. The waitress at the diner, she had mentioned a missing girl named Sarah Miller. "I think so," I said slowly. "I heard about a girl who went missing years ago, Sarah Miller." The deputy nodded grimly. "That's her. It looks like we've finally found out what happened to her." A wave of sadness washed over me. Poor Sarah Miller, lost and forgotten for so long. Finally found in a shallow grave on her family's property. The deputy continued. "We also found something else with the body. Something that might explain who buried her there." She showed me a small, tarnished silver locket. Inside, there was a tiny inscription, "To Sarah, with all my love, Jay." And then I remembered what Mr. Henderson had said about a shady character who used to hang around the Miller place. A man whose name he couldn't quite recall, but it started with a J. The pieces of the puzzle had finally come together, revealing a dark and tragic story. My quest for anonymity had led me down a path I never could have imagined, uncovering a decades-old crime in the process. As I sat there in the quiet of the sheriff's department, I knew my life would never be the same. The dark web had promised me a way to get off the grid, but instead, it had led me to a place where the past was buried, waiting to be found, and I had been the one to dig it up. The escape I had craved had turned into a chilling encounter with the true darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of the ordinary world. My name is Chris, and I've always been a bit of an obsessive collector, particularly when it comes to rare and out-of-print books. There's something about holding a piece of history in your hands. The weight of the paper, the scent of aged ink, it's a connection to the past that you just can't get with a digital file. My latest obsession was a first edition of The Serpent's Coil, a privately printed collection of macabre short stories by a relatively unknown author from the early 20th century. It was rumored to be incredibly rare, with only a handful of copies known to exist. I'd scoured every reputable antiquarian bookstore I could find, both online and in person, to no avail. Auction sites occasionally listed later editions, but the elusive first edition remained just out of reach, a tantalizing ghost in the world of bibliophiles. My usual haunts for obscure information are online forums dedicated to rare book collecting. These are tight-knit communities filled with knowledgeable enthusiasts who share tips, leads, and sometimes even help each other track down particularly elusive volumes. I'd posted about my search for The Serpent's Coil on several of these forums, hoping someone might have a clue or a connection. Weeks turned into months, and while I received some helpful suggestions about related authors and potential leads on similar obscure publications, the book I was after remained stubbornly hidden. Then, one evening, I received a private message on one of the smaller, more niche forums I frequented. The user's handle was Noxumbra, Latin for shadow of the night. It was a fitting name for someone who seemed to operate in the darker corners of the internet. The message was brief and to the point. "I saw your post about the Serpent's Coil first edition. I might know where you can find one. Have you ever considered looking beyond the usual channels?" My heart skipped a beat. Could this be it? After all this time, could I finally be on the verge of finding the book I'd been searching for? My initial excitement was quickly tempered by a wave of caution. Beyond the usual channels. What did that even mean? My mind immediately jumped to the more shadowy aspects of the internet, the places where legitimate commerce gave way to illicit activities. I replied to Noxumbra, trying to sound casual but undoubtedly betraying my eagerness. What do you mean by beyond the usual channels? A few hours later, Noxumbra responded. There are certain marketplaces that cater to less conventional transactions. Places where rare items, things that might not be easily found through legitimate means, can sometimes be acquired. Have you ever heard of the dark web? The dark web. The name itself conjured images of clandestine deals, illegal goods, and unsavory characters. It was a place I'd always been aware of, a shadowy underbelly of the internet that most people preferred to ignore. The thought of venturing into such territory for a book, no matter how rare, gave me pause. Was it worth the risk? My desire for The Serpent's Coil ultimately outweighed my apprehension. The thought of finally owning that first edition, of completing my collection, was too strong to resist. I replied to Noxumbra, my fingers hovering over the keyboard as I typed. I've heard of it, yes. I've never actually accessed it before. Noxumbra's next message contained a link to a hidden service, an address ending in onion, that was only accessible through the Tor browser. This is a bookstore that operates on the dark web. It specializes in rare and out-of-print titles, the kind of things you won't find anywhere else. I've seen The Serpent's Coil listed there before. You might want to take a look. My curiosity piqued. I downloaded the Tor browser and carefully copied the link into the address bar. The interface was clunky and slow, but after a moment, a page loaded. It was a surprisingly simple website, with a stark black background and white text. The name of the bookstore was Librum Umbra. Latin again, this time meaning Books of Shadow. The site was sparsely populated, with a few categories listed on the sidebar: esoteric texts, forbidden knowledge, lost classics, and rare editions. I clicked on Rare Editions and began to browse. The prices were exorbitant, as expected for such rare items, but the selection was unlike anything I had ever seen. There were first editions of books I had only dreamed of, signed copies of legendary works, and obscure pamphlets that had long been thought lost. Then I found it. Listed among a collection of early 20th century horror fiction was The Serpent's Coil, by Hare, the fictional author's name. The description was brief but confirmed it was the first edition, printed in a limited run of only 50 copies. The price was astronomical, several $1,000s, but considering its rarity, it was almost reasonable. My heart pounded in my chest. I had finally found it, but there was a catch. Below the price, in bold red letters, was a single, unsettling sentence. Seller requires in-person meeting for this item. An in-person meeting. On the dark web. This immediately set off alarm bells in my head. Why would a seller on such an anonymous platform insist on meeting face to face? It felt incredibly risky for both the buyer and the seller. Despite my growing unease, the allure of the book was too strong to ignore. I clicked on the listing hoping to find more details, but there was only a button to contact the seller. I hesitated for a long moment, my fingers hovering over the button. Was I really about to do this? Was I about to venture into the real world to meet someone I had only encountered on the dark web, all for the sake of a book? Taking a deep breath, I clicked the button. A small window popped up, allowing me to send a message to the seller. I typed a brief message expressing my interest in purchasing The Serpent's Coil, and asked about the details of the in-person meeting. A few hours later, I received a reply. The seller's username was simply Collector. Their message was even more cryptic than Noxumbra's initial contact. I have the book. If you truly desire it, you will meet me tonight at the old Blackwood Mill on the outskirts of town. Be there at midnight. Come alone. The message sent a shiver down my spine. The old Blackwood Mill was a notorious local landmark, a dilapidated and abandoned building with a dark history. It was the kind of place teenagers dared each other to visit, a place whispered about in hushed tones around campfires. Why would a bookseller choose such a desolate and ominous location for a meeting? And why at midnight? My rational mind screamed at me to back out, to forget about the book, to walk away from this potentially dangerous situation. But the collector in me, the obsessive bibliophile who had spent months searching for this elusive volume, couldn't resist the pull. This was it. This was my chance, I replied to Collector, my hands trembling slightly as I typed. I will be there. As the hours ticked by, a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I tried to distract myself, reading other books, watching television, but my mind kept returning to the impending meeting. The old Blackwood Mill. Midnight. Alone. The words echoed in my head like a sinister mantra. I knew this was foolish. I knew the risks were immense. But the thrill of the chase, the allure of the forbidden, and the burning desire to finally own the serpent's coil had clouded my judgment. I was about to step out of the safe confines of my ordinary life and into the shadows of the dark web, and I had a terrible feeling that I might not be coming back. The drive out to the old Blackwood Mill felt like it took an eternity. The night was unusually dark, the moon hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, and the winding country roads were shrouded in an oppressive silence. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating only a small patch of asphalt ahead, making the surrounding woods seem even more menacing. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow in the periphery, sent a jolt of paranoia through me. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see another car following me, or perhaps something even more sinister. The Blackwood Mill was located several miles outside of town, in a sparsely populated area known for its dense forests and forgotten history. Local legends whispered of strange occurrences at the mill, of unexplained noises and ghostly apparitions. It had been abandoned for decades, its decaying structure a stark reminder of a bygone era. As I got closer, the air grew colder, and a thick fog began to roll in, clinging to the ground like a spectral shroud. The mill finally came into view, a hulking silhouette against the inky sky. Its broken windows stared out like vacant eyes, and the skeletal remains of its once proud structure seemed to groan in the wind. A rustic chain-link fence surrounded the property, with a single, padlocked gate. I pulled my car over to the side of the road, a safe distance away, and turned off the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl and the gentle whisper of the wind through the trees. My heart pounded in my chest as I considered my options. I could still turn back. I could drive away and forget about the book. No one would blame me. In fact, anyone with a shred of common sense would do exactly that. But the thought of the serpent's coil, of finally holding that rare first edition in my hands, kept me rooted to the spot. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed the small flashlight I had brought and stepped out of the car. The air was damp and carried the musty scent of decay and wet earth. The fog swirled around my ankles as I approached the gate. It was indeed locked, but a section of the fence to the left had been pulled apart, creating a gap just large enough for a person to squeeze through. Hesitantly, I slipped through the opening and onto the mill property. The ground beneath my feet was uneven and littered with debris, broken bricks, shattered glass, and rusted pieces of machinery. The silence here was even more profound, a heavy, suffocating silence that seemed to press in on me from all sides. I followed a barely discernible path leading towards the main building. The mill loomed larger and more menacing with each step, its dark facade riddled with holes and shadow recesses. The fog seemed to thicken as I approached, obscuring the details of the structure and creating an eerie, almost dreamlike atmosphere. As I reached the entrance, a gaping hole where the main doors had once been, I paused. The darkness inside was absolute, impenetrable by the faint glow of my flashlight. A gust of wind swept through the opening, carrying with it the smell of mildew and something else, something faintly metallic and unsettling. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding weak and thin in the vast emptiness. "Collector, are you here?" My voice echoed back at me, swallowed by the darkness. There was no response. I hesitated for another moment, my hand instinctively reaching for the small pocket knife I always carried. It was hardly a weapon, but it was better than nothing. Taking another deep breath, I stepped inside. The interior of the mill was even more dilapidated than the exterior. The roof had partially collapsed, allowing patches of the night sky to peek through the gaps. Moonlight filtered down in pale, ethereal beams, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air and casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. The remnants of old machinery lay scattered around, rusting and broken like the bones of some long dead beast. I swept my flashlight beam around, trying to get my bearings. The main hall of the mill was vast and cavernous, with several smaller rooms branching off to the sides. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and something else, something vaguely sweet and cloying that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. "Collector," I called out again, my voice a little louder this time. Still no response. A wave of doubt washed over me. Had I been foolish enough to fall for some kind of prank? Was there no book? Was there no cellar? Had I driven all the way out here in the middle of the night, to a creepy abandoned mill, for nothing? Just as I was about to turn around and leave, I heard a sound. It was faint, almost imperceptible. But it was definitely there. A soft scraping sound, coming from one of the smaller rooms at the far end of the hall. My heart leaped into my throat. Someone was here. Clutching my flashlight tightly, I slowly made my way towards the sound. The floorboards creaked ominously beneath my feet, each step echoing in the silence. As I approached the doorway of the room, the scraping sound stopped. I hesitated at the threshold, my hand trembling as I raised my flashlight. Taking another deep breath, I shone the light into the room. It was a small, dusty office. A broken desk sat in the center of the room, its surface covered in cobwebs and scattered papers. A single, overturned chair lay on the floor. There was no one there. Confused, I swept the flashlight around the room again. Then, I saw it. On the far wall, scrawled in what looked like dried blood, were a series of symbols. They were unfamiliar to me. A strange and unsettling script that seemed to writhe on the wall like living things. A sudden chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just some eccentric book collector. This was something else entirely. Just as I was trying to decipher the symbols, I heard another sound, this time much closer. It was a soft footstep, coming from behind me, in the main hall. I whirled around, my flashlight beam dancing wildly. Standing in the doorway, bathed in the pale moonlight filtering from above, was a figure. They were tall and gaunt, their face obscured by shadow. They wore a long, dark coat that seemed to swallow their frame. In their right hand, they held something that glinted in the moonlight. "Collector," I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The figure didn't answer. They simply stood there, silent and still, their shadowed face fixed on me. I took a step back, my hand tightening around the pocket knife in my pocket. Something about this figure felt profoundly wrong. There was an aura of menace surrounding them, a palpable sense of danger that made my blood run cold. "I'm here for the book," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "The Serpent's Coil, first edition." The figure took a slow step forward, emerging further into the moonlight. As they did, I could finally see what they were holding in their hand. It wasn't a book. It was a knife. A long, gleaming blade that reflected the pale moonlight like a predatory grin. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't a book sale. This was something else entirely. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Had I been lured here? Was this some kind of trap? The figure took another step closer, and I could finally make out some details of their face. It was pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. A thin, cruel smile stretched across their lips. "You wanted a rare book, Chris," the figure said, their voice a low, raspy whisper that seemed to slither through the air. "Tonight you will become part of a very rare story." Fueled and paralyzing gripped me. I knew with a chilling certainty that I was in grave danger. My quest for a rare book had led me down a dark and terrifying path, and I had a sinking feeling that I might not escape this night alive. The knife in the figure's hand glinted again, and I knew that whatever this rare story was, it wouldn't have a happy ending for me. The sight of the knife sent a primal wave of fear crashing over me. My carefully constructed world of rare books and quiet collecting shattered in that instant, replaced by the stark reality of the danger I was in. My pocket knife suddenly felt pathetically inadequate against the gleaming blade in the stranger's hand. What do you want?" I stammered, taking another step back, my eyes fixated on the knife. The figure chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that echoed through the cavernous mill. "The book, oh, I have the book. But some treasures require a payment. A more personal exchange. Wouldn't you agree?" Their smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed a little too long, a little too sharp. The hollows of their eyes seemed to deepen, as if they were peering into my very soul. "I have money," I said quickly, my mind racing for a way out. I brought cash. How much do you want? The figure shook their heads slowly, their eyes never leaving mine. Money. Such a mundane offering for something so exquisite. No, Chris, I want something far more valuable. They took another step forward, and I could smell them now, a cloying mix of mildew. Something metallic, and a faint, sickly sweetness that made my stomach churn. The air in the room seemed to grow heavy, charged with a palpable sense of dread. What could be more valuable than money? I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to sound assertive. The figure tilted their head, their gaze almost playful. Your fear, Chris. Your desperation. The look in your eyes right now, that is priceless. They took another step, closing the distance between us. I instinctively raised my flashlight, hoping the sudden beam of light might disorient them. But they simply blinked slowly, unfazed. You came all this way into the heart of the night, to a place of shadows and whispers. All for a book. Their voice a hypnotic murmur. That kind of obsession, it leaves a mark. A vulnerability. And that, Chris, is what I'm truly interested in. I knew then that this wasn't about the book at all. It was about me. About my desire, my obsession, the lengths I was willing to go to for something I coveted. I had walked willingly into this nightmare, blinded by my own yearning. Panic began to set in. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and desperation. I needed to get out of here. I needed to escape. I took another step back, bumping into the broken desk behind me. My hand instinctively grasped for something, anything, to use as a weapon. My fingers brushed against a heavy, rusted metal bar lying on the desk. It was probably just a piece of scrap from the mill machinery, but it felt like a lifeline in that moment. As I tightened my grip on the bar, the figure lunged. The knife flashed in the dim light, a silver streak aimed directly at me. I reacted purely on instinct, raising the metal bar to deflect the blow. The knife struck the bar with a sickening clang, sending a jolt of pain up my arm. The force of the blow knocked me off balance, and I stumbled backward, tripping over the overturned chair. I fell to the ground with a thud, the metal bar clattering beside me. The figure stood over me, their shadow looming large and menacing. The knife dripped with a dark liquid, not blood, I realized with a sickening lurch. But something thicker, blacker. Foolish mortal, the figure hissed, their smile widening into a grotesque grin. Did you really think you could defend yourself against me? They raised the knife again, and I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. But the blow never came. Instead, I heard a strange, wet sound, followed by a guttural growl. I cautiously opened my eyes. The figure was still standing over me, but their attention was no longer focused on me. Their body was convulsing, and a dark, viscous fluid was bubbling up from their chest. Behind them, in the shadows of the doorway, stood another figure. This figure was taller and broader than the first, its form barely discernible in the gloom. But there was something undeniably menacing about its presence, a silent power that seemed to radiate from it. The knife-wielding figure let out a choked gasp and collapsed to the floor, the knife clattering beside them. The dark fluid continued to seep from their chest, forming a black pool on the dusty floorboards. The second figure stepped forward, emerging slightly from the shadows. I could now make out some of its features. It was humanoid in shape, but its skin was pale and stretched taut over sharp, angular bones. Its eyes glowed with an eerie, internal light, and its mouth was a thin, lipless slit that seemed incapable of smiling. It looked down at the fallen figure, then turned its gaze towards me. Its glowing eyes seemed to pierce right through me, examining me with an unnerving intensity. I lay there, frozen in fear, unsure of what was happening. Had I been saved? Or was this new figure an even greater threat? The second figure remained silent for a long moment, its glowing eyes fixed on me. Then, it slowly reached down and picked up the knife from the floor. My heart pounded in my chest. Was it going to finish what the first figure had started? Instead, the second figure turned and walked back into the shadows, disappearing as silently as it had appeared. I lay on the cold, dusty floor for what felt like an eternity, my body trembling uncontrollably. I was alive, but I had no idea why. What had just happened? Who were those figures? And what did they want? Slowly, cautiously, I sat up. The body of the first figure lay motionless on the floor, the black fluid still seeping from its chest. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and that sickly sweet smell. I scrambled to my feet, my legs weak and unsteady. I had to get out of here. I had to escape this nightmare. I stumbled out of the small office and back into the main hall. The moonlight still streamed through the holes in the roof, casting eerie shadows across the floor. I didn't dare to look back. I ran. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me out of the mill, through the fog-shrouded grounds and back to my car. I didn't stop running until I was safely inside, the doors locked, the engine roaring to life. I drove away from the Blackwood mill as fast as I could, not daring to look in my rearview mirror. The image of the knife, the gaunt face of the first figure, and the glowing eyes of the second were burned into my mind. I didn't stop until I was back in the familiar streets of my town, the lights of civilization a welcome sight after the darkness I had just escaped. I never went back to the dark web. I deleted the Tor browser from my computer and never spoke of my experience at the Blackwood mill to anyone. I never found the serpent's coil. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls outside my window, I still think about that night. I think about the figure with the knife, and the other figure with the glowing eyes. I wonder what they were, what they wanted, and why they let me live. And sometimes I can't shake the feeling that the rare book I was searching for wasn't the only thing that was being collected that night. Perhaps, in the shadows of the dark web and the ruins of the Blackwood mill, there are stories being written in language I don't understand, stories that are far more terrifying than anything I could ever imagine. And perhaps I played a small, unwitting part in one of them. I still collect rare books, but now I stick to the well-lit aisles of reputable bookstores and the familiar comfort of online marketplaces. The allure of the truly obscure, the forbidden, has lost its appeal. Some doors, once open, are best left closed. And some books, no matter how rare, are not worth the price of admission to the darkness that lies beyond.